Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al-Arabiya headquarters. These are our top headlines. US officials have said they would like to see elections held in Syria as soon as possible. The US strikes Houthi targets in Yemen. And the world rings in the new year with spectacular firework displays. Thailand is ringing in the New Year. Celebrations in Bangkok are known for their vibrant energy and stunning festivities. Fireworks light up the Chao Phraya River in the capital city. Now to our top story. In Damascus, a US delegation has held talks with Syria's interim government to discuss key priorities following the fall of Bashar al-Assad's regime. The American embassy shared updates highlighting critical issues such as countering extremist groups, preventing Iran's resurgence and protecting US citizens. The delegation also stressed the importance of uncovering information about the fate of Austin Tice and other Americans still missing. US officials have said they would like to see elections take place in Syria as soon as possible, just days after the new leader exclusively told Al-Arabiya that it may take up to 4 years before those elections are held. Meanwhile, Austin Tice is an award-winning American journalist who went missing at a checkpoint near Damascus in August 2012. Weeks after his disappearance, a video surfaced showing him blindfolded and being led by armed men. But there has been no sign of him since. The Syrian government has denied holding him, but with the fall of Assad and the rise of new interim authorities, new leads on Tice's whereabouts could emerge. President Joe Biden has said that his administration believes that Tice is alive, but it is still working to locate his whereabouts.
Do you guys know about where Austin Tice might be and if he's safe?
We believe he's alive. We think we can get him back, but we have no direct evidence of that yet. And Assad should be held accountable.
Let's turn our focus to Yemen, where the US has carried out multiple strikes against Houthi targets. The attacks have reportedly hit targets in the capital Sana'a and coastal locations in Yemen. The US Central Command says it has targeted a command and control facility and sites that produce and stored weapons, notably missiles and also drones. Referencing the strikes, the US Central Command says that the facilities targeted were used to attack US warships and merchant vessels in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. The American Navy and Air Force also reportedly destroyed a Houthi radar site, 7 cruise missiles and a drone. The strikes are part of US efforts to degrade Iran-backed Houthi efforts to threaten regional partners. Now, for more on this, I'm joined by Mick Mulroy, a former United States Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East, who joins us from Whitefish in Montana. Mick, thank you so much for joining us this evening. US Central Command has confirmed that the US hit Houthi targets across Yemen this evening. Do we know anything about the targets and the reasons why they have been hit today?
So good to be with you and your audience. I think Central Command, so the command in the U.S. military that covers Yemen, has a very long list of targets they would like to strike. In Yemen, some of them probably already pre-approved, some that have to go up to the president. It sounds like what they did here is standard when it comes to military targeting. Go after the command and control, which includes the leadership, and then their capacity to to strike, which is the manufacturing facilities and the arsenals that hold already manufactured weapon systems, like these advanced systems that can hit Tel Aviv and hit some of the ships transiting through the Red Sea. And it sounds like with that is what they have been doing. So this isn't much different, potentially different when it comes to what level of the command they went after. But I would expect that this will continue and maybe increase substantially once the administration shifts from Biden administration to second Trump administration.
As you mentioned, the Houthis are continuing to launch strikes on commercial vehicles in the Red Sea and Israeli cities, despite recent strikes by Israel, the UK and also the US. How much of an impact are these strikes really having on the militant group?
So it's difficult to determine, of course, because we don't know how many strikes they would have done if there was no attempt to mitigate it. It could be 3 times as many missiles and drones hitting ships and Tel Aviv, for example. So I think they should set a reasonable expectation, the coalition that's trying to mitigate the Houthis and basically state the obvious, with the Houthis won't back down. But what can be done is that their ability to launch these strikes can be mitigated or potentially even eliminated. It depends on how much the international community is willing to commit toward doing that. If they do, it could be reduced substantially. I think we'd still see strikes. So if the goal is to see no strikes from the Houthis, we'll never attain that. But I do think that we can collectively, internationally, which is an international problem. I mean, this affects countries as far away as China, more so than many of the countries that the Houthis tend to be trying to influence the most. So the international community could come together and mitigate this even more so, but I don't think we'll ever get to a point where there's no threat coming from the Houthis.
Mick, I just want to switch gears, actually. What does the US want to see from the new government in Syria?
So Secretary Blinken, and I don't see this changing that much, but Secretary Blinken said essentially 4 major things. One was, of course, an inclusive government that incorporated all of Syria, all of the different parts of Syria, and was selected by the Syrian people. So I'd say it's going to be disturbing for the United States to hear that they can't hold elections for 4 years. I mean, that sounds to many like an attempt to essentially gain power, keep power, and by the time the 4 years comes around, there will be no elections. But that's one of the main things that the United States would want to see. They'd also, of course, want to see the destruction of all the chemical and biological weapons that we know Syria had, the ones that haven't been destroyed by Israel. And then, of course, the uninterrupted flow of humanitarian aid to all parts of Syria, where there is no attempted use of the restrictions to basically try to gain political favor like we've seen in other places. So I think those are the 3 main points. I don't see them changing much between the administrations, but I think it's not a good sign from the U.S. perspective, this announcement that you all said that basically they announced that they won't have elections for 4 years.
So I just want to touch on something. When we were speaking to the new Syrian leader, Ahmed al-Sharaa, he told us that he wants the U.S. to lift the sanctions that are on the country because, as you said, there is a humanitarian effort that needs to happen, but economically, Syria has really suffered. Do you think the incoming Trump administration could help in this regard, and do you think we'll see those sanctions begin to ease?
So I definitely think that's a good point. A lot of the sanctions, for example, the Caesar sanctions, were on the Assad regime for their atrocities, and they're obviously no longer in charge of Syria. So one could certainly make the argument that those sanctions should go away, as Syria needs that economic influx to reconstruct itself and rebuild from the devastation of the civil war for the last 13 years. I think likely the Trump administration will be headed in that direction, but they'll want to see al-Sharaa and his government, and he's already appointing people into positions from his organization. They want to see this promised way ahead that is inclusive of all elements of Syria, that is chosen by the Syrian people. So an actual election, not just somebody who happened to be able to overtake a despotic regime by force. I think the Trump administration will likely look to see how they are progressing toward that aim, and then it'll reduce or eliminate sanctions respectively with that.
Mick, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We really appreciate it. That's Mick Mulroy, a former United States Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
We'll now take a look at New Year's celebrations around the world. New Zealanders were amongst the first in the world to celebrate the arrival of 2025 with a fireworks display in Auckland. The fireworks show started with a 10-second countdown projected on the base of Auckland's 32-metre-tall Sky Tower. This was followed by fireworks displayed which lasted 5 minutes with more than 500 kilograms of pyrotechnics launched from various firing sites. Sydney has welcomed 2025 with the biggest ever fireworks display featuring a golden waterfall falling from the iconic Sydney Harbour Bridge. The 12-minute display, stretched 7 kilometres along Sydney Harbour, featured 23,000 individual pyrotechnic shots. For the first time, fireworks were launched from 80 new positions on the western side of the Sydney Harbour Bridge. In China, President Xi Jinping's and party officials and also state leaders attended a New Year gala featuring traditional opera shows in Beijing. The performances included parts from the classic opera that depicted heroism and a love for China, while also highlighting the country's ethnic cultures. The city of Leigh-Ann, known as the hometown of fireworks, put on a stunning visual display on the weekend ahead of New Year's. Separately, China's Xi Jinping and Russia's President Vladimir Putin have both exchanged New Year's greetings. Turning to Moscow, where there will be no fireworks once again this year. Earlier this month, Moscow's mayor said that the fireworks will be cancelled again due to the ongoing war with Ukraine. This will mark the third consecutive year the displays have been halted on Russia's biggest family holiday. Celebrations have also been dampened by rising inflation fueled by Russia's war with Ukraine. For more, let's bring in our reporter, Dasha Chernyshova, who joins me right now from Moscow. Dasha, a pleasure to have you on this evening. Vladimir Putin has given his New Year's address, praising the achievements made under his 25-year rule. What more did he have to say?
Yes, indeed, the Russian president has given his New Year address to the Russian public, because keep in mind, Russia is celebrating New Year 11 times and in 11 time zones of this vast country. And in this pre-recorded address, the Russian president said the country will be moving forward in 2025 with confidence. He also reassured Russians that everything will be fine, providing, however, no exact details of how that will be fine. He also has stressed that Russians are thinking about the future future. He praised the courage of the Russian soldiers who are fighting in the ongoing special military operation in Ukraine, and also has stressed that there are many people in Russia whose patriotism is helping country be independent, sovereign and strong. So definitely in this one of the shortest addresses of the Russian president to the Russian public, he did try to set the tone for 2025, suggesting that everything will be okay. But keep in mind that this is taking place against the backdrop of rising inflation, and for New Year holidays, some of the products that are the key ingredients of festive cooking, like butter or red caviar, they have been seeing increasingly high prices, and this is part of the ongoing tendency that we are seeing in the Russian economy at the moment. The runaway inflation, the key interest rate being at the record height of 21%, and at the same time we also understand that the economy is expected to slow down next year, but some economists say that actually that is a good thing. We also have seen some of the public opinion polls here in Russia suggesting that one of the issues that Russians are looking for in 2025 is the stabilization of prices, as well as the tariffs and the improvements in the overall economic situation.
There'll be no fireworks in Moscow again this year on Russia's biggest family holiday. Why have they been cancelled again for another year?
Well, certainly if you look at the decorations that the Russian capital does have for New Year, you can probably wonder if anything military is taking place for this country, because they are indeed lavish. So the cancellation of those fireworks in Russia is basically in line with the general mood among the Russian population that do not see it appropriate, while the operation is ongoing, to have any sort of these festivities taking place. Meanwhile, we also understand that next year there will be fireworks taking place, because the year of 2025 has been declared the year of the defender of fatherland, because Russia will be celebrating the 80th anniversary in the of the victory of the Soviet Union in World War II, and that is a very important holiday for many Russians. So at this stage, we understand this is part of the general framework that is surrounding Russia's ongoing special military operation in Ukraine. And actually, if you look again at the public opinion polls, because Russians were asked about what they are hoping for 2024, many have said that they are hoping that this will come to an end in 2025 with the Russian victory. And at the same time, there are many Russians who understand that next year there will be many challenges that Russia will have to overcome.
Lots of challenges to overcome, as you say. What is the atmosphere like in Moscow this evening? We see you there as you all prepare to welcome in a new year.
Well, definitely you can, if you go to downtown Moscow, you will definitely see many people who are willing to celebrate. But it is a family holiday, so there are many Russian families who are getting together. The atmosphere is festive because it is a family holiday, because Russia will be free from work for the next week or so. There will be no working days for millions of the Russian population. But also, indeed, they understand that they cannot really plan for long term, because over the past years they have learned here in Russia that planning is a difficult thing, especially in the country that is continuing its military effort in Ukraine. So definitely the atmosphere is festive, but for many families this day has been soured, because some of their relatives are not present, because some of their relatives have to be elsewhere, and also the understanding that there are difficult years ahead. But generally speaking, you can definitely say that many Russians are quite optimistic, or at least realistic, understanding that they are in this situation, and what they have to do is just to be happy with what they have at this moment.
Dasha, Chernyshova in Moscow, thank you so much for joining me, and a very happy new year. I look forward to seeing you in 2025. London is only hours away from welcoming the new year. Last year, more than 100,000 people gathered for iconic fireworks along the Thames. In the UK, preparations are underway for the usual night of fireworks, music and, of course, a bit of drinking. But bad weather has meant some of the celebrations have had to be cancelled, especially in the north of the country. Stuart Smith has more from where London's officials are hoping the weather does stay good enough to launch the New Year's fireworks in just over 3 hours' time.
The British capital will see the largest organised event this year, with 100,000 people expected along the shores of the River Thames to hear Big Ben ring in 2025 and the traditional fireworks celebrations that come right after. It's also what millions will be watching on their TVs at midnight for those staying in, but plenty of others around the country will be out at pubs and clubs or at regional celebrations, usually marked by live music and fireworks. However, this year, a mixture of heavy rain, strong winds and even snow in northern Scotland have led to some fireworks and celebrations being cancelled. Most notably, the outdoor component of Edinburgh's official Hogmanay celebration. The street party, fireworks and open-air concert have been called off due to the danger posed by strong winds. That's also led to train services being cancelled across Scotland, meaning a few more might be staying in this new year than expected. Here in London, authorities continue to monitor conditions but are optimistic the weather will be good enough to mark the new year as intended. Stuart Smith, Arabiya News, London.
Now, in Germany's capital, Berlin, security measures are taking front stage following the deadly Magdeburg Christmas market attack last week. Roadblocks, fences and security cameras have been set up at the Brandenburg Gate, with 65,000 people expected to attend. Over 5,000 police officers will be on duty across the capital. 2024 has been rocked by a series of political, social and economic events which bring to a close an extremely historic and newsworthy year. We wanted to enter 2025 by reflecting on some of those stories from all over the world. Here's Al Arabiya's news selection of the biggest 12 news stories from the year. We begin at number 12. 2024 has been a deadly year for commercial aviation. 318 have been killed in plane crashes or disasters, making it the deadliest since 2018. On to number 11, the UK's Labour Party sweeps to power in a stunning landslide election victory in July and bringing to an end more than 14 years of Conservative Party rule in the country. Number 10, a Russian opposition figurehead Alexei Navalny died of a blood clot in the Arctic prison where he was serving a 3-decade sentence. Number 9, Saudi Arabia was announced as the host nation for the 2034 FIFA World Cup. The kingdom has promised to deliver the tournament of a lifetime as it prepares for hosting the biggest sporting event in the world. Number 8, Iranian President Raisi and the country's foreign minister were killed after the helicopter they were travelling crashed in foggy weather in Iran. Now on to number 7. Elon Musk's SpaceX makes history after successfully catching its super heavy booster rocket on a pair of robotic arms, marking a huge milestone for his goal of putting humans on Mars. Number 6, Israel kills Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar in a destroyed home following a chance encounter in Gaza, just months after the elimination of his predecessor, Ismail Haniyeh, in Iran. Number 5, Russia strikes Ukraine with its new hypersonic missiles after outgoing President Biden allowed Ukraine for the first time to use long-range US missiles to hit deep inside Russian territory in November. Number 4, 26-year-old Luigi Mangione charged with the murder of Brian Thompson, the CEO of United Healthcare, America's largest health insurance company. Number 3, the fall of Bashar al-Assad in Syria. The Assad family's 50-year rule in the country was brought to a swift end just 11 days after opposition groups launched an offensive on Aleppo. Coming in at number 2, the elimination of Hezbollah's leadership by Israel in September. What began with the explosion of thousands of booby-trapped pages belonging to Hezbollah militants ended 10 days later with the elimination of the group's leader, Hassan Nasrallah. And now to our biggest story of the year, the sensational comeback of Donald Trump. Despite 2 assassination attempts, court cases and a very tight polling, the former Republican president won the US election in a historic landslide. We'll be covering his inauguration from Washington here on Al Arabiya on the 20th of January. Stay tuned and I hope you join us. Back to celebrations, and of course it's New Year. In New York, more than 1 million people are expected to attend those celebrations in Times Square. Security in the area has been beefed up, with the police commissioner saying that law enforcement has been operating in a heightened threat environment since the 7th of October.
At this time, there are no specific credible threats to the Times Square New Year's Eve celebration. However, we have been operating in a heightened threat environment since October 7th, and we remain vigilant.
The famous ball drop, an iconic New York City event, has been prepared, this time with a vibrant kaleidoscope of colours over the heart of Manhattan. The ball can display more than 16 million colours and billions of patterns and is illuminated by over 32,000 LEDs. Pretty amazing. We can now go to Caroline Malone, who is in Washington ahead of midnight. Caroline, thank you so much for joining us. A brief test of the drop and confetti was made earlier this week, and we saw the host Ryan Seacrest and Rita Ora rehearsing their set. But what can we really expect when the clock strikes midnight tonight?
Well, certainly there will be celebrations across the United States when people are celebrating New Year's Eve in about 11 to 12 hours' time here on the East Coast. But it's also a time for remembrance because of the passing of the former president, Jimmy Carter, who died over the weekend at the age of 100. Lots of flags here being flown at half-mast, including, as you can see behind me, on the White House as well as on Capitol Hill in Congress. A lot of people reflecting on his legacy. Of course, living till 100 and only serving one term as president. He had a challenging time while he was in office. But after office as president, he received the Nobel Peace Prize and is lauded for his work in human rights and humanitarian work, as well as peace efforts. Now, President Biden, of course, is well aware that there is a big transition about to take place here in the United States, particularly in Washington, D.C., as President Trump will be coming into office in just the 3 weeks after New Year on January 20th, when he is officially inaugurated into the White House. President Biden will also be giving a eulogy speech at President Carter's funeral, which will be held in just 2 weeks' time, less than 2 weeks' time, on January the 9th, also here in Washington, D.C. So it's certainly a time for reflection as well as also looking forward. We are likely to see a lot of change. At least that's what future President Donald Trump has promised. He's promised to reduce taxes. He's threatened to introduce tariffs onto lots of other countries globally, which could have an impact on, international economies across the world. We've also seen him promise more efficiency. He's enlisted the help of Elon Musk, of course, the billionaire tech owner, to help him with that. And there could be a lot of controversies, though, because there seems to be already some division about how they'll handle things like immigration. Elon Musk saying he supports some types of visas to allow people to come to the US. Many Republicans saying, though, that they don't. So we could see a lot happen even in those first few weeks of January as we enter into 2025. Now, one area where the US won't be reducing its spending. That, of course, is in New York, in Times Square, as you've said there, with the ball drop happening. 1 million people set to watch that ball drop and to celebrate as the year changes from 2024 into 25. One other thing we're likely to see is hundreds of people throwing confetti off the buildings onto the crowds down below. Now, people have been enlisted for the last few weeks to write their wishes and their hopes and dreams onto that confetti. So really, you know, a symbolism of optimism and hopefulness for what 2025 can bring.
You've summed up what America can potentially expect going into the new year. You mentioned, you know, what's going to happen in Times Square, but they've really beefed up security. What more do we know about this?
Absolutely. Well, New York is on heightened security alert at the moment. And we've heard just, you know, as we go into these hours of New Year's Eve, that police are going to be having lots of different measures to protect people out on the streets. Among those measures, we've got police officers undercover who are going to be among the crowds. We've got police bringing canine dogs, dog sniffers with them to detect any potential explosive materials. We've also got lots of checkpoints happening throughout all the different crowds. People not allowed to bring sort of big bags in. They're not even allowed to bring umbrellas, even though it's predicted to rain. They'll have to wear ponchos or jackets. So really strong presence on the streets, as well as above. There's going to be drones being used to take a look at crowds from above and make sure that, you know, nothing is happening that could be a threat, as well as police officers out on horses as well. So we are likely to see a really strong police presence out on the streets. But, you know, crowds are already gathering in New York as early as 12 hours before the actual midnight and ball drop happens. So we are likely to see huge crowds there. There's going to be a lot of congestion, but police saying they will do everything they can to make sure, despite this heightened security alert, that people are protected.
I always admire people who go out 10 hours early to see something. It's definitely not me. Caroline Malone in Washington, thank you so much for joining us, and a very happy New Year to you. A reminder of our top stories. US officials have said they would like to see elections held in Syria as soon as possible. The US strikes Houthi targets in Yemen's capital. And the world rings in the new year with spectacular fireworks displays. And that's all from us on W News. Thank you so much for joining us. Riz Khan is coming up next. And don't miss Tom Burges Watson with GNT. Good night from me and Happy New Year to everybody who's watching.
At al-Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on al-Arabiya News.
It's very impressive.
Where knowledge meets perspective.
Hello and welcome. I'm Riz Khan. As we approach the end of 2024, let's look back at some of the remarkable guests and interview topics we covered since the Riz Khan Show launched at the start of the year. We've always tried to combine top news issues with human interest stories, relevant topics and inspiring people. And after more than 150 interviews in 12 months, there's a lot to remember. In July's half-year review show, I highlighted a cast that included Bill Gates, Norman Finkelstein, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Andrew Tate, Tyson Fury, Omid Jalili, and Stuart Copeland. And you gave us great feedback with your comments on the YouTube channel. Thank you. The second half of the year was still dominated by the two most visible conflicts in the news: Israel versus Hamas, and later Hezbollah in Lebanon, and of course the war between Russia and Ukraine. In a two-part end-of-the-year review show, we'll explore those pressing headline stories, as well as some of the lighter items we've covered. For this part one of the review show, there's a reminder that the eyes of the world were largely on the Middle East, Russia, Ukraine, and the 10th US presidential election. Let's start in the Middle East. As Israel continued to unleash bombing campaigns against militia in Gaza and Lebanon, the civilian death toll ran high. We covered the story a number of times, offering, as always, perspectives from both sides. Israel's President Isaac Herzog put the blame for the lack of peace in the region squarely on the shoulders of Iran. For Israelis, do you think the first anniversary of October the 7th should be marked as a day of reflection and remembrance, or one of revenge and retaliation?
We are not dealing with revenge and retaliation. We are first dealing with a lot of pain and agony. I can tell you, as the head of state of Israel, I've seen enormous pain and agony that I've never imagined I would see in my life. I see enormous pain and agony of hostage families, of wounded people, of bereaving families, immense amount of bereaving families, of communities that have been displaced, and so forth and so on, all around the country. And the real issue is that we understand that there was a huge opportunity that was laid out originally by President Biden, actually, just before the war, of the connectivity of Israel all the way to India, through the Middle East, through Saudi Arabia and the Emirates and so forth, that would bring hope and a huge message of peace in the region. And this hope was derailed by this vicious, horrific attack of the Iranian proxies by Hamas in the south, Hezbollah in the north, the Houthis from Yemen, and proxies in Iraq and so forth. Now it's a big challenge, but if we change the equation and uproot this empire of evil and move forward to a better future of connectivity and peace in the region, this could be of historic magnitude.
You know, sir, after an attack that was clearly quite brutal, a year that began with Israel receiving almost universal sympathy and support from the international community seems to be ending with it being seen by many now as a global pariah. Now, isn't that a damning verdict on Israel's response to that attack?
We know that we are being attacked as part of the entire war machine against us, attacked in the international legal forums, attacked in public opinion, attacked on campuses and so forth. But we truly believe in our vision. We are a democracy. We are an oasis in the Middle East. We have Jews, Muslims, Christians, Druze and Circassians living and dwelling together. Unfortunately, yesterday, Hezbollah has attacked in missiles a bunch of Muslim towns and cities, our brothers and sisters, we are with them in this war. This is the real reality of the region. The real reality that we're offering the region is a reality of coexistence and living together, making, of course, peace agreements and surfing towards accommodating each other. We are all the children of Abraham, and I call upon the people of Lebanon, the people of Iran, the people of all of the oppressed nations in the region to rise up and understand that if we move this empire of evil, truly an empire of evil, if we confront it and be tough together, we surely can hope for a better future and create a NATO-like structure in the region that blocks radicalism and terror.
Well, sir, last week's missile attack by Iran on Israel caused relatively little damage. Is the retaliation worth provoking a wider war, global recession, further strikes on Israel?
So first of all, I can tell you as somebody who was in the shelter that it is extremely unpleasant, naturally. 181 missiles, big missiles on Israel. It's as one can think, it's one of the largest attacks in one shot on any country, and clearly deserves an answer. But we are considering our reply, and we are considering the next step of how to prevent and how to deter the Iranian war machine. And since I'm not part of this, it's not under my responsibility, I leave it up to the government and the military, and I think we are calculating all calculations in this respect. But one has to understand Iran is the only country in the world who calls for the eradication of another member state of the United Nations. That's Israel. And they keep on saying it all the time. I saw the speech of the Supreme Leader. There was no message of accommodation or extending a hand or saying, let's move together, and two great nations, historic nations, to move together and help change the life of people in the Middle East. Rather, you see Iran spending billions of dollars of their own citizens' money on a huge war machine, on other people's infrastructure, which are all aimed to create pain, havoc, rape, burn, take hostages, and chop and destroy. So either we offer hope or we go for destruction. Iran offers destruction, we are offering hope.
Well, Mr. President, as obviously a person in your position, could you confirm whether or not there would be a retaliation against Iran, and how soon?
I cannot go into any detail, of course. I think the words of Prime Minister Netanyahu were pretty clear. But having said that, we are, of course, looking on the grand picture and understanding all of the various calculations and interests, and yet it is clear to us that being attacked in such an aggressive manner and brutal manner needs retaliation and an answer that will deter our enemies.
Considering how you describe it, Mr. President, would Israel, or would you advocate Israel going as far as eliminating Iran's oil facilities, its nuclear sites, even its leaders?
I have no intention of responding to your question.
Okay, so
don't take it personally.
No, I understand. But has the U.S. given you any go-ahead for any attack on Iran, from what you know?
So we have an intense dialogue with the United States, our closest ally and friend. We have an open, frank, and friendly discussion with them on analyzing both the strategic issues as well as the various operational considerations on the ground. Today, the commander of CENTCOM, General Kurilla, is going to visit Israel, and I'm sure it's going to be the main topic of the day.
Israel's concerted military campaign included the assassination of key leaders of both Hamas and Hezbollah, including Hamas's key negotiator, Ismail Haniyeh, and Yahya Sinwar, who's reported to have masterminded the October 7th attacks last year. And Hezbollah lost its leader of 3 decades, Hassan Nasrallah, in an Israeli Air Force attack. Hamas's spokesperson, Dr. Bassem Naim, directly blamed Israel for blocking the prospect of any peace and the return of Israeli hostages held by Hamas. If the argument that Israel always throws out is that Hamas cannot be a partner in peace because it's got a stated goal of destroying Israel, surely if Hamas officially says we do not have that goal of the elimination of Israel, that would change the dynamic and the relationship in terms of trying to achieve a peace.
Again, what should Hamas do more than to declare its official goal in its political document 2017 by talking about the acceptance of Hamas of a common ground between all Palestinians, which means if we have the chance to have a Palestinian state, an independent, self-sovereign state, on 67th border with Jerusalem as a capital, preserving the right of return, that we will cooperate in this, we will be part of this. But again, on Gaza, you have Hamas, you have October 7th, you have the resistance. In the West Bank, you have the PLO leadership, you have the PA, the Palestinian National Authority. What is the situation on the other side? Annexation of the West Bank, Judaization of Jerusalem, more than 20,000 Palestinians killed between 2000 and 2023 on checkpoints in their own land, in their houses, banned by extremists. What is, again, on the other side, we have a Palestinian partner who is ready to go ahead for this solution. So, but what is the response from the Israeli side? Declaring...
sorry, Dr. Naim. I realize.
2017 or 18, he has declared Yes.
No, sir, I know you've gone over those issues. I was really just looking to see if Hamas would officially make its position one which says we no longer look for the destruction of Israel, and then perhaps Israel has less of an argument against it. But let me ask you this. Did you believe that taking hostages would at least provide you more protection or, preserve the protection of the fighters against Israel's response? And perhaps that hasn't happened. The other thing is, obviously, there are families now arguing with the Israeli government for the return of their hostages. I spoke to one of them. They're desperate for news about the hostages. What information can you tell me about the condition of the remaining hostages after 1 year in captivity?
First of all, I want to reject this kind of arguments because it is part of the Israeli propaganda that we have captured Israelis in order to protect ourselves or our fighters. No, we have negotiated with the Israelis for years and years to get our freedom fighters, our heroes behind bars in Israeli jails, to get them free. Nael Barghouthi is now for more than 44 years in jail, and like Nael, there are a lot of Palestinian leaders and fighters behind Israeli jails, but we have failed. And the international community have also failed to help Palestinians to get their prisoners free. Therefore, the main goal of capturing Israelis, I'm talking about soldiers, is how to get our prisoners free. We have offered from day one, after October 7th, to have a serious prisoner exchange to release all prisoners, all captured Israelis, and to get all our prisoners free. But Israel, from day one, has rejected all these proposals and have declared 3 goals: to crush Hamas, to evacuate Gaza Strip from its people, and to retrieve the captured Israelis forcefully. Therefore, we have also accepted at least 2-3 times different proposals from the mediators, and each time these proposals, which was accepted publicly and praised by the mediators and by the Americans, was sabotaged by Netanyahu and his racist government, either by committing new massacres or assassination of the top negotiator, or by adding a new condition like what he has did in the last negotiated deal in July 2nd. We are ready to go for implementing this negotiated deal, which, by the way, this negotiated deal of July 2nd, the core of this negotiated deal is an Israeli paper, which was adopted by Joe Biden, and we have welcomed this Joe Biden proposal. Then it has become the UN Security Council resolution, and we have also welcomed this. Therefore, we are ready to go immediately for solving the whole issue by going for implementation of this broker deal.
"15 months after the October 7th Hamas attacks on Israel, the stalemate continues. For the Israeli public, the remaining hostages are a primary concern. I spoke with the brother of one of those hostages, Or Levy, whose wife Einav was fatally gunned down as they hid in a shelter after attending a music festival. Or was captured, and the Levy's 3-year-old son, Almog, is now in the care of his grandparents. Well, Or's brother, Michael, campaigns full-time now for the hostages and updated me as we sat together when he visited Washington, D.C. Seeing that video of the attack on that shelter and Or's capture must have been pretty difficult, obviously. But you want the world to see that video. Why is that? Why do you want it to be so public?
It took us a while to decide we want to release it and to show it to the world. But the way I see it is that sometimes the world need a reminder. People need a reminder that there are actually live hostages in Gaza. And I know it's really easy to forget about them, but it's about them. It's not about politics or the war or the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's about human beings.
It's very difficult to imagine what this last year would have been like for you. I mean, it's gone on way longer than most people could have imagined. And I'm wondering, emotionally, how trapped you feel in that moment because things haven't moved on after so long.
So I keep saying that people ask me, what are you going to do on October 7th? Or how do you intend to mention it? For me, it's just another day, because I still live in October 7th, 2023. And things were stuck there for me. Everything feels like one long day.
Have you become a community with other family members of the hostages? I mean, how does that help you cope? Obviously, if you do get together, it's a support structure. How have you found that coming together?
That's actually one of the positive things that happened because of it. They became my family. I can talk to them. They understand me with no words sometimes, and it's helping.
And yet, the difficulty is that all of you, the families of those waiting, you've had to deal with news. Either you hope for news of release, or you have the tragic news, as was the case with the bodies that were found.
Yeah, it's terrible. You know, sometimes when they are getting released, it's the happiest day you can imagine, and sometimes when we hear horrible news like the 6 that were executed, that's the most horrific news you can think of. So, in a way, it's like an emotional roller coaster. But the amazing thing is that we stay together. Even the families that got the worst announcement stayed with us, and they keep fighting with us. And that's amazing to see.
Conflicts, they have tragedy on both sides quite often. And as you try to cope, and you and the families of the hostages try to cope with the situation on your side, how easy or difficult is it for you to see what's happening on the other side? That, you know, the suffering obviously some of the Palestinians are going through, many Palestinians are going through.
I hate to see anyone suffer, and I keep saying it everywhere, that Hamas didn't just do it to us as Israelis. They did it to his own people. The Palestinians are suffering because of Hamas, and the fact that Hamas is still there means that everyone will keep suffering. And like I said, I hate to see anyone suffer, and I would love to live in peace together with Palestinians, if possible. And the only way to do it is to release the hostages, and this will end the war. And that's what I think that the world should do, push towards this.
In Gaza, the Palestinian death toll crossed the 45,000 mark, and the UN reported that 70% of those verified killed in the first 6 months were women and children. In addition, aid agencies report more than 100,000 injured, and desperate conditions for those seeking shelter in Gaza, where more than 3/4 of the buildings have been reduced to rubble by Israel's bombing campaign. It's now hard to find any Palestinian from Gaza who's not been directly affected by the death and destruction, and even those Palestinians living outside the Middle East. Soon after talking with Michael Levy about his hostage brother, I met with Dr. Tariq Haddad, a cardiologist living near Washington, D.C., who, at the time we met, was already mourning the loss of more than 175 members of his extended family. When you heard about the attack a year ago, then when did you then start to hear about what was happening to your family members, when the losses started from that?
Oh, it's within a few days. You know, the attack started almost immediately, and you know, I would say by mid-October we were starting to see casualties in my family and deaths, you know, and homes being destroyed, and you know, and then they just really started to mount. And you know, most of my family on my mom's side is in Khan Yunis. Most of my family on my father's side is in Gaza. So they were getting it on both sides. And it's, you know, at this point, we've almost lost track of how many deaths in my family. But it's been well over, at this point, 175 people in my family who've been killed. And it's just been a steady stream. It started in mid-October, and it hasn't stopped since.
You know, Dr. Haddad, one of the problems with discussing the numbers of people killed, the statistic, is that it starts to cloud what are the actual individual stories, the people, the human beings behind those numbers. And that's obviously now evident more so than ever with you and your story. So let's talk about the members of the families that you've lost. And I know it's a difficult conversation, but tell me about some of them. So, you know, who they were and what happened.
Yeah, it's very difficult. I mean, the past year has been a collective nightmare for my family. You know, there's too many to list, and that's the sad part. But just some of the stories that come to mind, just dozens and dozens of children. You know, there's an infant, Sabir, who died in December in the middle of the tents in Rafah after his house had been destroyed. And he died after his father had been killed, all of his siblings had been killed, and his mother had been killed. He was orphaned, and he died from hypothermia in the middle of December. A child who was literally a few days old, and he died from hypothermia, completely unnecessary, having had his home destroyed and all of his family destroyed. Another child from my mom's side of the family, Hamza, who, you know, he and his parents and his uncle and aunt and his other uncle and his grandparents all lived in one home. One Israeli missile attack in Khan Yunis on October 25th killed 16 members of his family. Hamza was barely 10 years old, okay, and he survived. He was the only one of his family. He survived. He woke up in a hospital with an amputation and with the news that his parents, his uncle, his aunt, his other uncle, his grandparents, every single member of his family had been killed. And then he himself succumbed to the trauma from his amputation. I just wish your listeners could understand what it would be like. You know, just take Palestinian or Israeli out of this and just imagine if you were a 10-year-old kid, every single member of your family has been killed, and you wake up in a hospital with an amputation for no reason. You're a child. Another family member of mine from my mother's side of the family, Tuqa, who was killed on her wedding day. Imagine being killed on your wedding day. She was killed with 9 other members of her family on the day of her wedding. Another cousin of mine, Dan Al-Farra, who was killed while she was pregnant. Another was killed on the day she got her PhD while she was sheltering in Rafah. My first cousin from my father's side, Hani, was killed with his mother. He survived initially to find his mother buried from the waist up in the rubble of their home, dead, along with his brother. He managed to survive with a fairly minor leg injury and bled to death the next day because there was no hospitals near his home. In Gaza, every hospital had been destroyed. He died from a completely preventable wound. I mean, the stories go on, and they just continue month after month. Just recently in August, you know, one of my cousins, Abdullah, was going to get bread for his family. His family was hungry. He just went in Khan Yunis just to wherever he could get bread. He had one bag of bread in each of his hands, and he was walking back to his home, and an Israeli missile hit him and killed him. And our last picture of him was him dead on the side of the road with a bag of bread in each hand. Just recently, about 4 or 5 days ago, another large segment of my mother's side of the family, 23 family members, all killed in a strike that was massive, absolutely destroyed. I think I provided you some video, but it's destroyed literally what looks like the equivalent of a New York City block. And it was 9 stories, and numerous families all killed, 23 members of my family. So yeah, numbers don't really tell the story. It's all these human stories. These are all innocent people. These are all members of my family that either I know or my uncles or my aunts know. And sadly, you know, I feel like one of the things as a Palestinian we've learned this year is how much we are dehumanized. We're not really looked at as people, just numbers. And I think their stories need to be heard.
Stories there of how the conflict between Israel and Hamas has directly touched the lives of people on both sides. Well, the news from the Middle East over the past 14 months has shifted some of the focus from a conflict that reaches its third anniversary in February. That month, in 2022, Russian troops launched a military incursion into Ukraine, a country already partly annexed some years back under the orders of Russia's President Vladimir Putin. Few expected Ukraine to hold out for so long against Russia, but with support, sometimes on and off, from Western allies, Kyiv managed to largely thwart the Kremlin's invasion plans. Still, Moscow's push further into Ukraine has worried some of Russia's neighbours, especially as fears have risen that Vladimir Putin is now actively engaged in hybrid warfare, using cyber attacks, intense propaganda and disinformation, and even interfering in other countries' elections. The Baltic nations are particularly wary because they closely share shipping routes with Russia and have seen, among other things, damage to crucial underwater data cables connecting various countries in the region. I had a chance to speak candidly with Andris Spruds, the defence minister of NATO member country Latvia, about such concerns. There is a fear among some in the Baltic states and other former Soviet nations that Russia is trying to create a split within each country between those citizens of Russian origin and the rest of the population, and even among politicians who are pro-Russian or anti-Russian. What chance is there Russia could create that kind of division in your country?
Well, of course, Russia can attempt and try different kind of means and measures to split and to divide, and I think this has been part of the Russian hybrid activities again for years. Of course, we are a democratic country, which means that there is diversity of opinions, diversity of political parties as well, and we are proud of it, that we have this diversity. At the same time, on the fundamental issues, sovereignty, freedom, democracy, supporting Ukraine, there is no split in Latvian society. Yes, there is some legacy of the Soviet Empire. Unfortunately, there are some minority groups within society which sometimes seems to be still living in the past. It could be acknowledged, but absolute wide majority among Latvia's population, including Russian-speaking population, are loyal, patriotic, supportive of NATO, supportive of course, of being a member of the European Union, also supporting Ukraine.
European officials are investigating what they believe is sabotage of underwater cables in the Baltic Sea, including a connection between Lithuania and Sweden and Finland and Germany. What information are you getting about this issue and what's being described as a hybrid warfare being waged by Russia against the West? What can you do to avoid something similar affecting Latvia?
There is hybrid warfare in the region. Absolutely, this is without any doubt. And Russia wages this hybrid warfare activity. I would be a bit more careful exactly specifically on this incident because still some investigation must be completed to make specific already the conclusions. But yes, we are partly facing those challenges of defending, protecting our critical infrastructure. It's not easy, let's be again straightforward, because we see cables hundreds of kilometers and you cannot keep the warship above every cable, every place. This is, of course, also understandable. But additional monitoring, additional cooperation among institutions, additional flag appearance, also showing the NATO presence in the region. Also, of course, additionally adding warships and patrolling. This, of course, has been done and must be done. And, of course, additional monitoring is certainly the key response to this.
I presume that's in response to Britain's warning that Russia is preparing to use cyber attacks on critical infrastructure against European nations supporting Ukraine in this conflict.
You are absolutely right. We've been facing cyber attacks again for years. 3 Baltic countries, if we look at some specific cyber attacks, 30%, almost 1/3 of cyber attacks against European Union, they are targeting exactly 3 Baltic countries. So we already built a strong wall of resilience against cyber attacks, but it is an ongoing process. It is ongoing homework to improve our resilience, to improve our reaction time, to improve our, in a sense, the wall against any such kind of detrimental activities by Russia. And it should be put straightforwardly, by Russia first of all.
Russian Member of Parliament and popular TV host Yevgeny Popov joined the show once again to assess the situation from the Russian perspective. A key topic was the potential for the Russia-Ukraine conflict to escalate wider and turn nuclear. Popov suggested the option was there, but that the Kremlin was reluctant to take it further at this stage. Evgeny, good to have you back on the show. Now, following the recent developments in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, both the green light given to Ukraine to strike inside Russia and, of course, the Kremlin's response with the use of new hypersonic missiles, how much closer is the world to nuclear war?
I thank you for giving me your floor, and I don't think we are pretty close to the full-scale nuclear war, because it's many steps away in forward on stair of escalation, and we just going up on the stair step by step to the nuclear war. But I don't think that we have that there are much insane politics in Europe and in the United States, which is want to be blown up in a nuclear war. And that's why I think we are closer to the negotiations than to the nuclear war.
I'll touch on that a little bit as the show goes on, but President Putin suggested the use of this new Oreshnik missile was a warning to the West. What do you think will happen if the West doesn't listen to this warning?
It's hard to say for me, because I'm not a guy from military Ministry of Defense, but I think it was important warning from Russia to any countries who thinks that we're not going to respond to the escalations. It was a signal to the West, to Washington, to London, to Paris, which is already using their missiles against historically Russian territory. It was hard signal, and I think it was it being heard in Western capitals. But I don't think that Ukraine and Washington will stop using the missiles again against our territory. But on every step which Washington or this lame duck administration will do, we have a response. But it's better for us to be on a table, on a table of negotiations rather than using new type of weapon.
Well, both the conflict in the Middle East and the Russia-Ukraine one featured in Donald Trump's presidential campaigning throughout 2024, with Mr. Trump claiming he could end the conflicts in a day. He'll have that opportunity after his inauguration on the 20th of January. This election was almost universally described as the most unique in American history for a number of reasons. I returned to Washington to interview some well-informed parties about the pending new political landscape in the USA. First of all, I caught up with Al-Arabiya's veteran correspondent and bureau chief in DC, Nadia Bilbassi, who secured an interview with Donald Trump just 2 weeks before the November 5th vote. Nadia has seen a number of presidents come and go, but even she was surprised by the events of 2024.
Riz, this is completely different than anything we have seen before for so many reasons. Number one, you have 3 months before the election and you have completely new candidate. We didn't go through the primary system. You know, we covered the primaries, but for a different candidate, which is President Biden. So it was very, very different in every sense of the word. We have a candidate who was a vice president, a woman, and the whole world probably was waiting to see if the U.S. is going to elect the first woman president, and a woman from a minority, which is African and Asian origin. We also have a president who's been indicted, a former president who's been indicted. We had a former president who had been attempted assassination on his life twice. It was very strange in so many ways, and the polling was showing that they are so close to each other. So I never seen a percentage that close till almost hours before the results came out.
Yeah, how surprised were you by it being literally a landslide for Donald Trump?
I think it wasn't just me. I think President Trump was surprised too.
How's your relationship with him? Because you served as a correspondent here, as a bureau chief, during his first presidency, and of course you got to interview him recently.
True. When he was in the White House, I think he has a very combative relationship with the media in general. You have to admit that certain journalists were, they were seeking this kind of conflict, and we saw it on air, actually, on many networks. This is why he was very probably upset and angry of how the media in the U.S. is treating him. For me, it was actually when people ask me, because I covered the White House since President Bush, we have more access during President Trump than any other president, which is very surprising. Why? Because he did not follow the system. The system is always being like, if there's a press conference, then the White House will pick and choose certain reporters to ask the president a question, maybe 9 reporters out of 60 or 80. With him, he will open it and he goes like, anybody want to ask a question? We go to the Oval Office for what they call a pool spray, supposedly for 5 minutes. We can say for an hour. He will take every question because President Trump came from the media background. He understands the value of the media, and he also cannot stay away from being the headline in the media. So he always liked to generate news and make news, which is good news for journalists. But again, this relationship that he called the media the enemy of the people. Now, for me, I've been working with this interview for years, in fact. It happens in the last 6 months, when basically I called every connection that I know that will lead to him. And finally, I got a phone call from one of his closest advisors in April. And he told me, we're not doing interviews with the foreign media now, but I promise you, after Labor Day, we're gonna revisit this. And he said, I heard from so many people about you, so this is how it worked.
Experienced Republican Party advisor Adolfo Franco was Donald Trump's spokesman during the 2024 campaign. He believes a fundamental change in the mindset of Americans is why Mr. Trump had so much support at the ballot box. So what do you regard as the most significant aspect of what's become an historic comeback?
Well, I think the most significant aspect is that despite lawfare that was launched against President Trump, or persecution, political persecution against President Trump, doing everything to deny the American people the right to vote for President Trump. There was a realization, and it was a simple question that Ronald Reagan asked many, many years ago, and President Trump asked the same question. Are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? And that is really the decisive reason that the president won the election. It has nothing to do with identity politics. It has nothing really to do with abortion. It has nothing to do with this idea of democracy and the rest of it. It was a question of the American people getting a right to see an agenda that really addresses their day-to-day needs. And that's why the president won.
I'll touch on some of the policies and the prospects in a moment, but I wonder, was this a generational vote, something that might realign support for the Republican Party for years to come?
Well, that's an excellent question, because there's a tendency in our studies of voters that when they vote a certain way initially in their lives, they tend to repeat that. It's a formation point. And the inroads that we made with young voters were remarkable in terms of what the president did. So now if the president delivers, which I think he will in the next 4 years, I think it is generational. I think it is a decisive moment for the Republican Party, and it is for this reason. It has broadened the Republican Party in a way that no other Republican in modern time has done.
So you referred to the Latino vote. Now, both the Arab American and the Latino votes seem to have played such a significant role in this election. What is it, do you think, that has encouraged these voters to switch their allegiance from the Democrats to the Republicans over the past 8 years?
Well, I think the Arab American vote is a little bit different. For example, in Dearborn, in Michigan, where there's a very large concentration, the largest of Arab Americans in the United States, 19% of Arab Americans voted for Jill Stein as an alternative. They weren't necessarily voting for President Trump. This, of course, has to do with the situation in Gaza and Israel, which is of great concern to many Arab Americans. So I think that is a little bit different. However, many Arab Americans as Latino voters, again, they're making the decisions. They're just like any other Americans. What I think has been a huge mistake for the Democratic Party, and it's been coming for many years, is what we call identity politics. And that is to silo voters, to say, well, if you're a Latino, you need to vote on these particular issues. If you're Arab American, on these particular issues. At the end of the day, I think voters are looking at policies holistically, and that's what this election's results demonstrated.
I'll touch on that again in a moment, but I wonder, with a clean sweep of the presidency and both houses of Congress, effectively, Donald Trump has a very powerful mandate, almost a free hand, to do what he wants to. He's got a mandate from the people now. How do you think he will use that? How can he use that power he now has?
Well, I think he will move very, very quickly, because most business gets done in the first 2 years of a presidency. I think he'll move very quickly in Congress to do tax and regulatory reforms, particularly extending the tax cuts, which is the domestic issue in this country that are set. His tax policies that were set in place 10 years ago expire next year. That's the success that Biden has had as been a consequence, ironically, of the Trump policies of 2017, because they've been in place all of these years, but they're set to expire. That requires just a simple majority in Congress, which he will have. And I think that will be the #1 congressional priority. On his executive powers, which he has broad executive powers, I think you'll see very swift action on the border, on border security with executive orders. There'll be a remain in Mexico policy, what we call a catch and release in this country of illegal immigrants will stop immediately, and you'll see those things happen quickly. You'll see a reversal on energy policy through regulation. You'll see actions on tariffs very, very swiftly as well. So when you see the president's first days, they will be a slew of executive orders reversing the previous administration's policies and setting in place new policies. He is I know him. He is extremely mindful of the need to deliver as quickly as possible for the American people on reducing inflation and getting crime and illegal immigration under control.
Considering the divisive nature between the parties, how much is the reversal of some policies from the Biden administration really a bit of kind of just revenge?
Well, I don't think it is revenge. I think there are significant differences on policy on the big issues in this country that have to do with, again, immigration, have to do with government spending, which I think he will rein in now with Elon Musk being tasked to look at the size of government. I don't think it will be a revenge. This was an election, and I think I agree with the Democrats on this, an election about the kind of country we envision and the kind of country we will be. And as a consequence of that, I don't think there'll be revengeful policies. They're just different perspectives of what the role of American government should be. And that he needs to deliver on very quickly.
A perspective there from a close confidant of President-elect Donald Trump. But not everyone sees such a positive side to a second Trump presidency, including another journalist who's covered the Washington, D.C. scene for a long time. Veteran former CNN White House correspondent and Washington bureau chief Frank Sesno now directs strategy at the George Washington School of Public Affairs. He expressed his concerns about Donald Trump's return to the White House. As an American, as well as a senior media figure, are you bracing yourself for a major difference in the way the U.S. works both domestically and internationally?
Yes, I am bracing myself for a very substantial shift. And I think a shift that people haven't still been able to really fully apprehend. Because last time Trump came in, it was sort of surprising. And there were people who came with him from the traditional Republican Party, the gatekeepers, the guardrails. Those are all gone now. Trump knows where the levers of power are because he's had them. And he's had 4 years to stew about it. And as he has made very, very clear in his public remarks, he does seek a degree of retribution and revenge. And the people who he's bringing with him, those who've already been nominated for some positions, have very strong, and some would say, would use the word extreme, positions on things. So I think it's going to be a fiercely anti-regulatory, nationalistic, if not isolationist government that's going to be ratcheting up trade war pressures and other things to assert this MAGA agenda that Donald Trump very clearly talked about and brings to office.
I spoke to one of his advisors, who knows him well, who said he expects Donald Trump to tone down the rhetoric to a large degree, that things might be a bit calmer this time.
I have never seen Donald Trump tone down the rhetoric, and even if he does, there are people around him who don't want to or don't need to. Because now it's not about rhetoric. Now it's about power. They don't need to scream about it and cajole the party, whatever. And plenty of people voted for them and like them and want this. And I think we need to listen to that and understand what that means. But they know what they want to do. They've advertised this very clearly. And so it's not about rhetoric. It's about reality. It's not about speeches. It's about action.
What did this very divisive election teach you about the way Americans consume news?
Well, I think this very divisive election taught us a lot of things. First of all, I think it taught us that Americans are not very good at listening to other Americans. I think it taught us that the years of division and this notion that, well, if you just look at Donald Trump and understand what he's doing, you'll realize he's not qualified for office, has not been a message that has sold. And the role of traditional media has been eviscerated. The role of traditional media has been so weakened and so changed. Candidates don't need the media, traditional media. That's why Trump didn't do a second debate. It's why he sat for virtually no mainstream media interviews. And Harris did very little of that either. I mean, so they went through their influencers, their podcasters, their friendly interviewers to get to the niche audiences they wanted. Social media filled in a lot of the blanks. And the role of traditional news, of traditional media, which I know well from previous years, it still exists, but it's been marginalized.
With social media playing a much bigger role in everything nowadays, as you've indicated, what does it tell you about the way election coverage has evolved?
Election coverage has evolved to cover what you can and grab that piece of people's attention that you can get. Broadcast networks audiences are down. Cable news network audiences are down. The old print, legacy print media are down. Even the digital publications have struggled. Local and regional news organizations have laid off massive amounts of staff and lost circulation and clicks and viewing. As people have gone to TikTok, to their other social media platforms, and to one another. And the big gains, the big winners here are the big podcasters. These people who have YouTube channels and podcasts that have, in some cases, millions of devoted listeners and viewers. That's a sea change. And those podcasters and YouTube channel stars, they don't play by the journalistic rules that you and I used to play by. It is not about accuracy above all else. They don't have producers and editors who are gatekeepers and who fact check them before they go on the air. So that level of media accountability has been whittled down.
So how should the media, at least the mainstream media, handle the return of a president who sees them as fake and as an enemy of the people?
The mainstream media confront a massive challenge now because they are going to be targeted again and probably more effectively and in a more sustained way than they were when Trump was in for the first time. He has famously or infamously called media journalists enemy of the people. So it's not merely an adversary in our constitutional system. It's an enemy in our culture. That is a very dramatic and very dangerous shift.
Well, we don't often get the chance to canvass public opinion, but we do want to hear your voice. So while in Washington, D.C., we stopped a few people near the Capitol building for their thoughts on which social and global issues the new Trump administration should prioritize. Using the popular social media grading system known as tiers, we got the thoughts of a rather diverse sample of people. So tell me where you're coming from.
Colombia and Austria.
All right, so now Donald Trump is going to be back in the White House. As people who are living overseas but might be affected by policies, what are you most worried about? What are you most happy about?
For me, I think it's going to be a big change for all of us immigrants. It's going to change the rules, and I hope everything gets better for us and for everyone too.
I think the climate is a big point that is going to change because he's also with the white and black persons. He's not in touch that much, and he wants to America to be white again. And I don't like it so much because I think America is a land that everyone can come in and be a part of America. So I'm not a big fan of him. So yeah.
Well, let's do this. Let me get a board which has 5 of the key policies that they talked about during the election, and see. And you can put the number just next to the ones you think is most important. Which is the most important? There's only 5 of them. Let's try this. So look, we've got numbers are there. So border is, of course, immigration. Unity, they promised to get everyone back together again because the country was very divided. Ending wars, of course, Gaza and Russia, Ukraine. Climate, you mentioned, an economy for American people. So pick these numbers and just quickly push them into the board which you think is the most important. I guess you'll have to choose together.
I think economy will be the first.
Yeah.
Economy first, great.
So. Okay. I'm not sure.
So border immigration, unity is getting everyone together again after all the politics.
Yeah, I think it's important right now
Yeah.
because they are very divided right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think the climate is very important.
Yes.
So free.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I want border.
Yeah. I think so too.
And 5.
And 5, yeah.
Any wars.
Any
Yeah.
wars.
All right,
yeah.
super. So tell me where you're from.
I'm from Egypt.
Welcome.
Yeah.
And?
I'm from Kazakhstan.
Welcome again. So, listen, it's an interesting time post-election in the USA. A lot of people are wondering, how things are going to be in the next 4 years as Donald Trump becomes president again. What are your concerns? What are you happy about? What are you worried about?
Yeah, I'm happy about that. It's going to be like a list for like immigration, like the illegal immigration, and I think it's going to be good for the economy. I mean, the day that Trump won the elections, the stocks went high and everything went very good, so, and crypto, and I have some crypto, so that's good for me.
And you? Yeah.
I'm not good in politics stuff, but I believe that it will work for America very good, and not only for America. As I know, Trump has very good relationship with the Russian Federation, and it might stop the war in Ukraine, and I believe that everything happens for the good reason.
Well, during the election, they all talked about policies. And we have a board. We're creating a tier list. And we just want you to put the numbers next to the policies, the issues that you think are the most important. So it's 1 to 5. I'm going to bring this up to you. So, guys, if you want to just take those numbers and put them in the order of which you think are most important.
Oh, all right.
So border, of course, is immigration and so on. Unity is getting the country back together again. Ending wars.
Ending wars.
Okay, let's just put it here.
First thing for me.
Right.
Because, I live close to Gaza in Egypt.
Oh, goodness, yeah,
so
of course.
Okay, the second, I guess, borders.
Borders.
Okay, pretty good.
Well, I'll put economy before borders, actually, but it's okay.
Okay, joint agreement.
Yeah.
Okay, I guess unity.
Okay.
So what do you mean by unity here?
Well, it's, the country got very divided here. And so people are, worried about it. And so then 5 would be climate. Climate's coming in last.
Yeah, I mean, the weather's very nice today, so...
Oh, you're cheating. Hold this up and we'll just get a picture of you guys holding it. Thank you. A couple of quick questions. What's your general feeling on the way the vote went?
I think the way the vote went, it was mixed feelings. Really want the new administration to be successful in what they promised, things like economy, ending wars, things of that sort. If they can be successful, I think everyone will be happy at the end of it.
Do you think a new Trump administration is going to change things much, the way your life is, will it be affected?
I think so. Last time around, the economy was really good while he was president. At the end, it kind of suffered a little bit, but that everyone was in that boat together. But I think economy will be better.
Well, now Donald Trump is going to be back in the White House. What encourages you most and what scares you the most?
The encouragement part is he's now saying he's pro-legal immigration. So that's the encouraging part. He is going to turn around the economy. So that's also positive. The scary part is with which speed things are getting implemented. So it can be I just hope no rash decisions are taken. That would be something that I would look out for.
What's popular on social media is tier lists, where different tier of priorities occur. So I'm going to show you a board that has 5 of the key policies that were referred to in the election. And I want to just get you to put numbers quickly against which you think are the most important of these. So, Neil, if you would, could you bring it over and you can... Yeah.
So I think ending wars would be the first priority, considering that will drive a lot of other things as well. The economy can be better if there are no wars, etc. The number 2 would be economy, considering he is the most pro-bullish economy person in this race. The third, I would say, would be in unity. So
bringing the country together.
Yep, that like while we are bringing up the economy, ending wars, like bringing all the people together would be definitely a good one. And then border, just cleaning, not in the sense that making sure things are done and do the legal process. And yeah, finally, climate change.
And he said he's going to drill.
Yes. So, I mean, the one thing I really want is, like, we need to take a balanced approach, not like either this or that way. Like, there is a balance that we can strike. Hopefully, we can come up with that as part of this.
Sir, thank you so much. Great. So, guys, tell me where you're from.
I'm originally from California, and then I moved to Texas and Maryland.
California.
Okay, well, welcome to the East Coast. Let me ask you, the election's over now. Donald Trump's going back into the White House. People are wondering what's going to happen. What do you like, what you don't like about what might happen?
I think it's really an era of like uncertainty to try to figure out what's going to happen. I think just to read on people I've talked to, different sides, there's hopefulness. There's some sadness and there's some joy. But I think really the big thing is people have their fingers crossed, and hopefully we can pull it together and actually just work together for our country instead of all this other stuff.
A lot of people worried about the country becoming so divided. This campaign probably more than ever before. Did this concern you?
No.
You weren't worried about the divisions?
Division's bad, and it's the worst I've seen in my life, and gone through a bunch of different presidents. I didn't think it was as bad as some people felt, maybe. Like we just came back from Gettysburg, and having seen where America was at that time when literally hundreds of thousands were dying, fighting the Civil War, we're not there. And so I thought it was a little overplayed that people would talk about it being there. But the division's just bad. There was a time when we used to be able to just disagree and move on with our lives and do what's best, the best we can. And it just seemed that we've lost that sense of what's right and what's wrong and how to balance that. Be able to just disagree and again move on and do good things.
So I'm going to ask you a favor. What's big on social media now is tiers, layers of priorities. So I've got a board, and it's like five of the policies that were discussed, from unity of the country to border, immigration, and so on, economy, and so on. And just put a number by which one you think, in the order you think they're most important. Okay. So here, for example, which one would you make number 1, which to number 2, and so on?
I would say number 1 is definitely the economy. It always is. You can't feed your family. There's not much sense in talking about anything else. Number 2, me personally, and it kind of goes together with the economy, because the border, no nation can just keep a wide open border and you'll see this in Europe. I spent 2 months in Europe, and you see the same thing over there. They're struggling with that. So
number 2 by
I would definitely say number 2. Unity, just because if we don't get that piece together, that's got to be at least number 3. Number 4, war's never good.
Yeah, and so climate comes in number 5.
And then, climate comes number 5. Because if all the other pieces aren't in place before that, what's the point? Let's make sure you get on a good side.
So there you have a sample of the public voice. And that wraps up part 1 of our 2024 review show. In part 2, we'll revisit some interesting topics, like the sensitive debate over assisted dying, the worldwide danger of plastic pollution in oceans and rivers, and even the all-female Saudi psychedelic rock band making waves. Join us for those next time. For now, from me, Riz Khan, and the team, happy holidays and best wishes for the new year.
we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Al-Arabiya News.
It's very impressive.
Where knowledge meets perspective.
Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive insights and fresh perspectives from leading experts and influential decision makers every weekday here on Al-Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson, and coming up in this special edition of the programme, we take a look back at some of the highlights of the last few weeks. Welcome to the programme. The Russian President Vladimir Putin does not seem to be letting President Biden's approval of Ukraine's use of US long-range missiles go unanswered. In response, he has approved changes to Russia's nuclear doctrine, now stating that an attack from a non-nuclear state, if backed by a nuclear power, will be treated as a joint assault on Russia. Well, the updated doctrine proposed last September was ratified today on what was the 1,000th day of the war in Ukraine. Well, Washington has been accused by Russia of escalating the war in Ukraine, or as the Kremlin puts it, adding fuel to the fire. Well, all this comes after President Biden authorized Ukraine to use US-made missiles, allowing it to strike deep into Russian territory for the first time. Well, let's get some more analysis, and we can speak now to Philip Breedlove, who is a retired four-star general who served as the Supreme Allied Commander of NATO. Thank you very much indeed for being with us once again, General Breedlove. Great to have you with us. I'd like to put to you this new development that we're following here at Al-Arabiya. Russia says that Ukraine has fired these US-supplied long-range missiles into Russian territory. And this, of course, just the day after President Zelensky was given permission by the Biden administration to do so. What are your thoughts at this stage?
Well, I am thankful that our government has changed its policy. This is a change we should have made years ago. Russia has been firing into Ukraine from the Belarus airspace, Russian airspace, Black Sea airspace. They have been using missiles from at least two other countries and missile parts from China to develop their own missiles to fire into Ukraine. And so we in the West have, in that same time, forbidden Ukraine from using any of our equipment to return fire. It was an absurd policy when it was first made, and hopefully now we are past that point.
I mean, if this is confirmed, do you find it surprising that the Ukrainians were so quick to use this new weaponry?
No, I mean, there have been targets that were appropriate for this kind of missile for months and years. This is a capability that we should have given Ukraine a long time ago. And so they've had a developed target list, and it does not surprise me that they would fire quickly. Remember that in the last 3 or 4 days, Ukraine has come under intense attack by Russia. Russia has increased its ferocity in this attack. Some say it's sort of an answer to Mr. Trump. Mr. Trump told them not to accelerate the war, and Mr. Putin has chosen to accelerate the war since he's been told not to. And so as Russia does accelerate this war, just the other night they fired over 210 long-range weapons into Ukraine. Since they have stepped it up, then Mr. Zelensky has replied.
Okay, so of course Ukraine has now confirmed that it's used these ATACMS, and we've heard Russia reacting to this, saying this signals a new phase of, quote, Western war. I'm just wondering what you see as being possible next steps by Russia.
Well, Russia's throwing everything they have at Ukraine right now. I'm not sure that there is more left for them to accelerate with. Of course, the Western world is fearful they might use a nuclear weapon. This is what Mr. Putin wants the West to believe. His army has failed him in many ways. His air force has failed him in many ways. His Black Sea fleet has been defeated in the northern Black Sea. What works extremely well for Mr. Putin is his war of intimidation. He continues to threaten the West on almost a daily basis about things that the West told him they were fearful of, nuclear exchange and or a widening of the war. And these are the things that Mr. Putin talks about all the time. What has he done in the last 2 days? He says he signed a new document which changes their nuclear doctrine. This is the way Mr. Putin replies to challenges from the West. He steps up his rhetoric, he steps up his intimidation, and he expects the West to back down.
You don't sound very concerned. I mean, the European top diplomat, Josep Borrell, has said that Russia is irresponsible for using this kind of rhetoric. But how can we be so sure it's just that? It's only rhetoric. How can we be sure that Russia...
I don't think I've said this morning that it's just rhetoric. I just said this is what he uses. We have to be academically honest that he might use some of these weapons. I mean, in our past... we faced similar, if not worse, crises in America, and our President Kennedy stood up to it, and he solved the Cuban Missile Crisis. And then in the intermediate nuclear range missile crisis, Mr. Reagan stood up to it, and he solved that crisis. And so we now are in a similar situation to those two. And academically, they both faced real reactions by Russia. And we do face real reactions by Russia. But what we do know for sure is that every time Mr. Putin threatens us, we back up, then we know exactly what the results are. We will be backing up. At some point, the West has to take a look at this threat and take a different action, I think. Just one more point. In 2008, the reply of the West to the invasion and occupation of Georgia was inadequate. We gave great gift to Russia in that they kept 20% of Georgia. We rewarded bad behavior. Then in 2014, Russia invaded Ukraine. The West's reply was once again inadequate to task, and we rewarded Russian behavior by allowing them to keep portions of Ukraine. And now in 2024, we are faced with a similar situation. Will we once again reward bad behavior, or will we make a change in Western policy?
Well, that remains to be seen, doesn't it, with the new administration coming to power in 2 months from now in D.C. I mean, what do you see the Trump administration bringing to the table with regards to relations with Moscow and with regards specifically to this conflict with Ukraine?
Well, I think that we clearly will have some, as the naval officers say, a sea change in the way this is approached. Mr. Trump, President-elect Trump, former President Trump, has said that he wants to end this war quickly, and I believe it. I think he wants to find an end to this war quickly. I think that at this point, as you've seen many pundits writing, Mr. Putin sees that and sees that he thinks he has the upper hand because he believes Mr. Trump needs a quick end. And so this is going to end up in an interesting negotiation. Mr. Trump has already told Mr. Putin not to accelerate this war. Mr. Putin has chosen to accelerate the war in answer to Mr. Trump's demands. And so I think the conversation has already started.
I just want to pick up on something you were saying a moment ago, recalling the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962. Of course, that's the closest, isn't it, that the world has come that we know of to a proper, full-blown international nuclear warfare. Do you think this is the next most dangerous point that we've come to in history, to full-blown nuclear war?
I'm not sure I would categorize it as that. Again, we had the intermediate range nuclear missile crisis of the Cold War that President Reagan handled. I think that what I would say is that if the West always backs up, we will get closer and closer to nuclear war. A famous Russian thinker once tells a story of, as you approach your enemy, fix your bayonet and press your bayonet into the enemy's belly. And if it is soft, push further and harder. If the belly is hard, step back and reconsider your options. And so right now, in 08, in 14, our belly was soft, and Mr. Putin is pushing further and harder. We have a choice to make in 2024.
Today is, of course, the 1,000th day of this war in Ukraine. Winter is approaching, and I expect you, like lots of military experts, have been following the conflict very closely these last 3 years. What typically happens at this time of year, or perhaps what typically doesn't happen at this time of year? Perhaps I should rephrase the question, because isn't it a time when people's positions get sort of entrenched, the ground turns extremely hard? Can we expect much to happen on the ground in the next couple of months?
Well, I'm not being rude, but let me correct you. This war is 10 years old. It started in the early winter of 2014 when I was the commander of NATO. And it has been going for 10 years. It's been hot for the first couple of years. Then it went warm as the line in the Donbass settled for some number of years. And now we're almost 1,000 days into the latest part of this 10-year-long war. So to the second part of your question, repeat it, please.
I was just wondering what typically happens at this time of year, given that the ground is so hard.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So lots of things happen due to the weather. We go through a really muddy period where the ground is untrafficable for large armored formations. Then we get to a frozen hard period where armored vehicles can once again move, but it's really hard to move an army around when it's so cold. And so then in the spring, we'll go back through another intensely muddy period where there's no trafficability for for heavy weapons for a while. So the tactics of the battlefield seem to settle down. And what happens typically for Russia is they intensify their attack against the Ukrainian people. As you watch how Russia has bombed Ukraine over the last 10 years, and certainly over the last 1,000 days, Russia's attack is almost uniquely towards the Russian or to the Ukrainian people, to Ukrainian infrastructure, energy infrastructure, all the things that get Ukraine through a cold winter. This is what Russia is attacking. They've proved rather unable to put an intense attack against the Ukrainian forces, so they focus on the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian civil infrastructure.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us once again. General Philip Breedlove, thank you.
Thank you.
Now, the US President-elect Donald Trump has said he is willing to make use of the military to deport migrants in large numbers. While taking to social media, he indicated that he would declare an emergency and use military assets to carry out mass deportations. Well, the issue of immigration has become an increasingly important issue and a leading cause for concern, dissent and debate within the United States. Let's take a look at some numbers for you. The US is home to 1/5 of the world's international immigrants. About 11 million undocumented immigrants live in the United States, making up 3% of the country's population. Well, as of 2022, unauthorized immigrants made up 23% of US foreign-born population in 2022, higher than when Trump was president back in 2019. Well, the president-elect built his campaign on the foundations of immigration reform, repeatedly promising his supporters to mobilize the National Guard and aid the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, known as ICE, to carry out deportations. Well, for more, we're joined now by Ronald Vitello, a former ICE director who was also the chief of Border Patrol during the last Trump administration. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. The incoming Trump administration says it's going to declare a national emergency and use the military to carry out these mass deportations. Is this really a national emergency?
Well, we've just gone through a crisis about the last 4 years with unprecedented illegal entries at the southwest border. At the peak, 10,000 people a day were crossing the border illegally. The government itself, the DHS itself, has said that 85% of those people have been released into the country, so they now live amongst us in every city and town in America. We're also faced with a terrible opioid crisis across the country in which hundreds of thousands in the last 2 years of Americans have died or been poisoned by this deadly fentanyl. So it has been an emergency for the last 3+ years. And so a correction needs to occur. I support the president's idea that we need to fix the border, stop the leak and stop the chaos at the immediate border, at the southwest border, but then repair and fix the security situation in the rest of the country. And that will require more than the organic assets that ICE and the DHS have at their disposal now.
So who should be most concerned about this development? Who's at the top of the list for deportation?
Well, the president has been very clear that the criminals and threats to public safety would be at the top of the list for targeted enforcement, immigration enforcement in cities and towns all over the United States. So those with convictions, those who are wanted in other countries, those who have run afoul of the law in the United States, the worst are going to go first.
But how many will we be talking in that case?
I've seen open source reporting in the press that there's 8+ million people on what the government calls the non-detained docket. That's 8 million people who are in the country and they have no status and they need to see an immigration judge. Some of them have already been ordered removed. And in that ordered removed category, there are 1.5 million people who have some sort of criminal involvement or a criminal record. They're either wanted somewhere or they've committed crimes that make them ineligible to get relief from an immigration judge in the United States. So at minimum, there's 1.5 million people who are in the country illegally and have also committed crimes in the communities and towns that they live in.
Okay, according to the American Immigration Council, deporting 1 million people would cost more than $960 billion over the period of a decade. I mean, that's a huge amount of money. Is it worth it?
Well, there's been times in the history of the United States. I heard yesterday that when Barack Obama was president, he managed to deport almost 4 million people in his first term. And so, yeah, I mean, it involves logistics, it involves employees, it involves salaries, it involves detention, it involves airplane flights to repatriate people and take them back home. And so, yeah, it's expensive, but it also minimizes the impact all over the country of lowering wages, of our school systems that are overburdened, our cities and towns that don't have enough properties to rent. So there is a net benefit in the security of the United States, first and foremost. And then it helps in some of these other areas as well. And so, yes, it might be expensive, but you are paying for national security along with border security.
Let's talk about this mass deportation program. It's supposed to begin on the first day of the new Trump presidency. But can it really get started on day one? Because, of course, there's due process, isn't there, for each case to be considered really on a case-by-case basis?
Well, all operations of the government require a will from the commander-in-chief to support the front line. Right now, as we speak today, in many of the large cities in the United States, ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement removal officers, are out looking for the worst of the worst. They're looking for people who have run afoul of the law in their own community and are also in the country illegally. And so they can take the handcuffs off. They can prioritize those activities while a plan is being written, while a plan is being coordinated, while the logistics are put in place to scale up their work. There's about 150 of those officers in the United States, but there's nearly 20,000 immigration officers in ICE. And so you can reallocate the existing resources in ICE, perhaps get some help from the Department of Defense, and use the state and local cooperation agreements that exist today and enhance and improve those along the way. So starting day one, they can prioritize this activity and add resources as the plans are written and operationalized.
Okay, but I mean, obviously there are going to be legal challenges, and that's going to hold the process up, because obviously due process can't be completely disregarded. But then not just legal challenges, there's also going to be logistical challenges. I mean, there's talk of large-scale detention camps being built, tents being built. I mean, all that's going to take a huge amount of time, isn't it?
Well, there will be a time factor into when they can get it to scale. But as it relates to the legal factors, that 1.5 million criminally involved aliens are in the country, and many of them have already been ordered deported by a judge. They are already on the path for removal. They're just not in government custody to go ahead and repatriate them back home. And so the law is very clear. It's against the law to cross the border illegally without being inspected and stay in the United States. It's also against the law to work while you're illegally in the United States or to be hired by an employer. Employers can be fined for similar things. And so the legal footing that the president will stand on for targeted enforcement against the worst of the worst, and then scale up to the 20 plus million people that are in the country illegally. The law is very clear on status there. And there is a due process element. And I would just say in the last 3.5 years, the government has spent billions of dollars in caring for people who are in custody when they rush the border for the last 3.5 years. There are facilities, there are about 8 facilities across the U.S.-Mexico border on the U.S. side that temporarily hold people before they're released in the United States. One of those large facilities in the El Paso area cost $1 billion a year to run. And so we're already spending enormous amounts of money for the flow that is occurring today. If you stop the leak and repurpose those facilities, you could scale this up fairly quickly.
But I mean, talking about cost again, I mean, the costs, really go into the stratosphere at a certain point, because we've talked about the cost of deporting 1 million people, and that would be somewhere in the region of $960 billion. Donald Trump says there are between 15 and 20 million people who could be drawn up on a list for deportation. I mean, just doing the maths, I mean, even if it's 10 million, which is what Pew Research says it is, the number of people who could be deported, we're talking about $10 trillion US. I mean, does the United States even have that kind of money? Because last time I checked, it's about 1/3 of national debt.
It's going to be expensive. They're going to require resources. But I will just tell you that when we had the largest surge at the border of its time in 2014, when Barack Obama was the president, again, they were deporting hundreds of thousands of people every single day. When he asked career people like me to fix the problems at the southwest border, we put a number of steps in place to deter people from leaving home and trying to come into the United States, because we ended the incentives. If you end the incentive to be in the United States illegally, many people will elect to go home by themselves. You'll remember that when Donald Trump became the president in 2018, there was a mass exodus from the United States into Canada of people who were illegally in the country and were fearful of being deported and removed by the U.S. government, and they fled to Canada. So some people will elect to go home to stay out of immigration detention, to stay out of the logistics chain, the pipeline, to be returned home. And so it's not just government agencies going out and putting hands on every single of the 20 million people that have come into the United States in the last several years. It will also be able to verify departures of people who wish not to stay under the conditions in which they can't find a job, that if they get arrested by local authorities, they're going to be immediately referred to ICE for removal, and then a concentrated effort to find the worst of the worst across the United States.
But we're talking about some people who, for example, like the Dreamers, who came to the United States as children. I'm just wondering whether they'd be concerned by sweeping deportations, and whether the DACA legislation brought in by the Obama administration, that's the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, whether that would be scrapped. What's your understanding of what would happen to those people?
Well, DACA is not law in the United States. It was a function of the executive branch. The president authorized the Department of Homeland Security to defer deportations for people that fell in that certain category. The Supreme Court has ruled that action to be illegal. Trump tried to end it in his first term. He tried to end the program and enrollments in the program in his first term. It was pushed back by the courts, and the courts didn't weigh that case on the merits. So it's not immigration law. But if we're starting with the worst of the worst and we're prioritizing the existing assets that DHS has now to focus on threats to public safety, it'll be a long time before we get to a place where somebody that's been in the country for over a decade will be on a path for removal.
And just lastly, tell us a bit about how you envisage your role being in the new Trump administration. And by extension of that, do you envisage more sections of border wall being built during Trump 2.0?
Well, I'm not a government employee now, but yes, I think that there are some unfinished portions of the border in which material and contracts were let to build border wall that will be reinstated. We've learned a lot over the last 3.5 years when the U.S. government sued Arizona and Texas for trying to protect their own borders. And so some of the infrastructure and some of the lessons learned in those will be applied to a new regime for infrastructure on the border. So I expect that the men and women of the Border Patrol are going to have the kind of support that they've not had in the last administration, the Biden administration, and will return to someone in the Oval Office that knows what they do and wants to give them the tools that they have to succeed.
Okay, Ron Vitello, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to Al-Arabiya News.
Thank you.
Well, Lebanon's presidency is reserved for a Maronite Catholic, the premiership for a Sunni Muslim, and the Speaker of Parliament for a Shia Muslim. Well, in the absence of a president, authority rests with the Prime Minister and his cabinet. Well, to discuss the potential end to Lebanon's political paralysis, we can cross to Beirut and speak now to Ghassan Hasbani, who is the former Lebanese Deputy Prime Minister and Public Health Minister. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us, sir. You're currently MP for the Strong Republic bloc in the Lebanese Parliament. Your country, of course, has been without a president, as we've been saying, for more than 2 years. It's now been announced that this special session of Parliament will be held on the 9th of January to elect a new president. How significant do you regard this development as being?
Well, it's quite an important development because we have been asking for this session for more than 2 years. And we would hope that this session would actually be a fully constitutional session. What does that mean? Because all the previous sessions were held as a single session, whereby the first round requires a supermajority of 86 votes for anyone to be elected president, while the second round would require only 64 plus 1 votes. But we never got to the second round. The Speaker, parliamentary bloc, and his allies, Hezbollah, have always walked out of the room, leaving the session without quorum in the second round. And we had multiple first rounds that have been called for, and this is why we never were able to get a president democratically elected in more than 2 years. So we're hoping that this would be a significant step and that they would stay in the room for a second or third round until we elect a suitable president to lead the country in the next phase.
Okay, so who is that suitable president? Are there some candidates that you can see everyone rallying behind at this stage?
There are candidates that could rally people behind them. Some names are known, other names are still kind of in the development. We need somebody, more importantly than the name, we need somebody who can, first of all, this is a presidency for 6 years, not just for 1 year. So we need somebody who can establish stability and work with the Lebanese armed forces to implement the ceasefire and any further agreements and international UN resolutions fully and properly, because we cannot go back to what we were before the war. Secondly, a president capable of rallying the Lebanese people around a vision, around the constitution, able to rebuild the state system and rally people around the state, and at the same time be able to lead the country out of its economic downturn that we've been living through for more than 4 or 5 years now.
Okay, so given what you've just described as being the profile of the perfect candidate and the circumstances in which Lebanon finds itself, would you say that the right person would be more likely to be a career politician, or do you think a technocrat would probably be the right person for this kind of a job?
Well, it's going to be a complex job. Definitely the right person is somebody who values the Constitution and would implement his oath on protecting and implementing the Constitution, somebody who understands the public sector workings because they need to hit the ground running, somebody who is respected internationally as well because there's going to be a lot of engagement with the international community for the recovery, and someone who can at the same time understand economic issues and be able to lead the recovery plan together with the Prime Minister. So yes, there's going to be a technical background, a technocratic background, as well as somebody who understands also the workings of Lebanese politics. They could not just be parachuted into this position, and Lebanese public administration. All of these are criteria and important traits. However, more importantly, someone who's a sovereignist, who believes in the finality of the Lebanese state as it stands today on 10,452 square kilometers, somebody who would also uphold the Constitution and be able to declare that and implement the fact in the Constitution that no one carries arms but the Lebanese sovereign armed forces. And this is a starting point.
Okay, and I noticed you used the word his on one occasion there. It doesn't sound like you think there are any women candidates waiting in the wings.
At this point in time, I don't think there are any women candidates who have a serious chance of getting there, although we would hope that there will be more candidates coming forward with these qualifications and these commitments publicly made. We had asked, at least our bloc, that the next president should be clear about his or her position, but most likely it's going to be his because this is where most of the candidates are. But if it is her, that would be great. Position with respect to the implementation of UN resolutions. Now that we have a ceasefire agreement that enforces the implementation of UN Resolution 1701 and all the preceding resolutions, we do need a president that actually believes in that and capable of following it through.
Okay, and given, we're talking about a date of the 6th of January by which time a president might be agreed on. I mean, the situation Lebanon is in is extremely critical, and given these critical times, don't you think an emergency measure could be put in place so that this is done sooner? I mean, rather than waiting for another 6 weeks when the country needs leadership.
Absolutely. This is what we've been calling for. In fact, we called for it to be done 2 years ago. And throughout, we proposed candidates. We went to every single session and voted for a candidate. And we kept asking for a session to be held continuously, non-stop. So yeah, we do hope if it happens, we would like it to happen today before tomorrow. But that's what the speaker decided on. We don't know the reasons behind that. He surprised us this morning. At least better late than never.
Okay, I mean, obviously the people of Lebanon have been through absolute hell the last 2 months or so. Aside from installing a new president, I mean, what do you think are the other main priorities for Lebanon's political class to ensure that Lebanon's 5 million people get the future that they deserve?
First of all, definitely forming a government, nominating a prime minister, forming a government very quickly, a government capable of managing and conducting all the reforms and the tough measures required for the reforms, instilling stability and ensuring stability on the military side so that no weapons will be present outside the sovereign armed forces and the authorized security forces. So basically this would be a dismantling of all armed militias, infrastructure, and recovery of any existing weapons across Lebanese territory. Thirdly, the priority would be to safeguard the borders and Lebanese territory across all land, making sure that all borders are properly controlled, and to embark on a recovery plan for the country, economic recovery, social recovery, and a complete overhaul and restructuring of the public sector, reducing its size, corporatizing certain state-owned assets to improve their performance, and addressing the financial services sector problems, and dealing with the depositors' money who are still waiting for the fate of their deposits after the crisis, then putting together and launching a full recovery initiative for the economy and fiscal policy.
Okay, so clearly lots needs to be done. I mean, one other thing that I'm wondering how you think this is going to be done. I mean, Hezbollah obviously isn't going anywhere. How do you think Lebanon decouples itself from Hezbollah and its grip on power and their apparent ability to hold the whole country hostage?
Well, we can't assume that Hezbollah is not going anywhere. Hezbollah is gone. Hezbollah, as we know it, as we have known it for 40 years, is no longer. Now we have a new set of options for Hezbollah. They either continue trying to rearm and fail in that and go against the international will and most of the Lebanese will, or they accept the fact that they can be part of a democracy like all other political parties and become a political party to play the role that is given to them by whoever wants to support them. And this is their right as a political party. But they need to be under the umbrella of the state, like everybody else, on an equal playing field. So this is not about decoupling. This country has tried to decouple itself from a paramilitary force that has existed for 40 years, and it hasn't happened. And this impossibility of decoupling led to the country collapsing economically and then collapsing militarily and socially, with billions of dollars in losses, more than $10 billion in this war, 45,000 houses destroyed, 100,000 damaged, more than 12,000 injured, and 4,000 killed. All of this is the cost of having this failure of decoupling or trying to decouple Hezbollah from the government without any results. Now, what happened has happened. Devastation has happened in Lebanon, but we should not let this go without any plan or any action to fix the situation for the future and never go back to the point we were at before the war.
Do you think Hezbollah is going to buy into that and play ball?
No, I don't think so. But this is not probably going to become a choice at some point in time. It's going to be a global will imposed on the situation. And most of the Lebanese want to move forward. The international community has put its weight to guarantee that, and we hope they act on it. The war, unfortunately, that nobody wanted and we had warned against many, many times before and called upon Hezbollah not to engage into a regional war, and they never listened. This war should not return. We hope it does not return. But it does seem that if Hezbollah is not compliant, this war might return and might go on. Lebanon has been given a chance by the sponsorship of the United States, France, and many other countries, and Arab countries as well. But this chance may be lost if Hezbollah keeps insisting on continuing the fight. The ceasefire decision or agreement is quite clear about the dismantling of all paramilitary infrastructure or military infrastructure outside the Lebanese armed forces, to disengage from any military acts and to collect any existing weapons and to prevent new weapons from entering the country or being manufactured in the country. The text is crystal clear, clearer than any UN resolution that we have seen so far. It is basically a practical and on the ground implementation and interpretation of all UN resolutions 1701, 1559, 1608, and others that have been written over many, many years.
I just want to ask you lastly, in a piece that was published on Al Arabiya's website by Makram Rabah, who is an assistant professor at AUB, perhaps you're familiar with his work, he said that the ceasefire deal was, quote, nothing short of a total capitulation to Israel's demands. Obviously, this deal was agreed to under duress by Lebanon. Do you think it was a good deal?
It depends on how you look at it. Because a good deal would have been to implement 1701 and 1559 earlier this year before the war happened. We would have avoided a war, we would have avoided all the losses that I mentioned, and we would have actually had stability in the country, reaching a very honorable point where we are in harmony with UN resolutions and the international community and bringing back Lebanon to the place it should be in. The failure of implementing those resolutions and the refusal of Hezbollah to comply with those resolutions led us to doing this under fire. Unfortunately, no one can agree with having a war or putting this duress on the implementation. But again, the point of view of many neighboring countries now is shifting towards a more stable Middle East, and we need to be part of this more stable Middle East and stop the donkey shot approach to instability. So under duress or not, this is reality, and this has been the result of the war. The destruction that has happened to Lebanon led to this final decision to which Hezbollah has actually agreed, and the Lebanese government has agreed, and if they do not wish to implement, then they will put us all back, all the Lebanese back, into a war situation.
Just before we say goodbye, I just want to ask you, Mr. Hasbani, on a personal note, how it feels to wake up every morning, as you have done for the last 2 mornings now, without the sound of drones, without the sound of planes, without the sound of shelling. How does that feel?
It feels very good. This is the country we want to live in. This is the country we want to have permanently. But it also is worrying because it is very fragile. This stability, we're cautious all the time. In fact, we did have certain bombings in the south already. So effectively, we don't feel yet that the war is really over. It really depends on how seriously Hezbollah takes this agreement in terms of implementation.
Okay, well, thank you very much. We really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Ghassan Hasbani, thank you so much. So Lebanon has entered its second day of a ceasefire, but concerns remain with reports indicating a potential breach on both sides. The IDF states that it has detained 4 Hezbollah members who approached Israeli troops in southern Lebanon. They also reported firing on several individuals they described as suspects, this in Mace al-Jabal. Meanwhile, the Lebanese news agency reported that 2 people had been injured in Israeli shelling in the Nabatea governorate. Well, despite Israeli warnings against movement beyond the Litani River, displaced Lebanese civilians are returning south, with some heading to villages where Israeli troops are still deployed. Well, let's cross back to Beirut now, and we can speak to Khalil Hello, who is a retired general in the Lebanese army. General Hello, it's great to have you back with us on Al Arabiya News.
Thank you.
In your opinion, is the third Israeli-Lebanese war really over, or is this merely a 60-day pause?
No, it's not over at all. And I remind everybody that the first war between Hezbollah and Israel occurred in 1993, the second one in 1996. Then we had the Israeli withdrawal in 2000, and then in 2006. And this is the 5th time we speak about a truce or a ceasefire. So as far as the ingredients of any war are still there, I mean, the Hezbollah armed branch and the Palestinian conflict, as far as these ingredients are there, and as far as Iran involves itself in Lebanon, I think that this truce will be fragile. And the first elements of this fragility, we saw them today and yesterday. Israel fired on what it considered a movement that are a breach to the ceasefire, where they said Hezbollah elements were moving south, or that Hezbollah elements were manipulating missiles, short-range missiles. So they targeted them. And yesterday, the Hezbollah speech in Lebanon by Hezbollah MP and Hezbollah ministers are of a concern, because we understood that they don't want to withdraw their weaponry from south of the Litani, and they were questioning about the efficiency of the deployment of the Lebanese army south. So all this raised concern that this is a truce that saw the light under pressure on Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, first of all by the delay of the delivery of some important ammunition from the United States, because when this truce was announced, the U.S. announced that they will deliver for $620 million of ammunition to Israel. And the second thing is the arrest warrant against Netanyahu issued by the International Court, that France said we give immunity to Benjamin Netanyahu. So I think that there was a bargain behind this truce. And when things are this way, I don't think it is serious. We may believe that this is a true ceasefire once for all when Hezbollah complies with the International Security Council Resolution 1701, 1558, and accept to give their weaponry to the Lebanese army according to this resolution. And when we find that Hezbollah complied, first of all, with the resolution 1701 without any pressure, then we can believe, then we may believe that this will be a real ceasefire and a real stability.
Yeah, I mean, General Hello, do you think they're likely to do that, Hezbollah? And, or do you think they're just going to use these 60 days to regroup and rebuild? And how is the Lebanese army going to play a part to make sure they don't do that?
Okay, now Hezbollah needed desperately this ceasefire, because their strategy, number one, is to spare what remains of their military power. And their military power has been seriously degraded by Israel during 14 months of bombardment. And the second strategy of Hezbollah is to keep its strength and assertiveness in the Lebanese interior affairs. So Hezbollah during these 60 days will reorganize for sure, will try to rearm, but this is unlikely, because Syria is the pathway to this rearmament, and it is now, it has been bombarded heavily by Israel, and even United States Air Force targeted some Iranian fractions in Syria that tried to fire on the US bases there. And today we have a huge battle in northern Syria, where we are hearing about incursion of Turkish tanks toward Aleppo. So all these events converge toward one thing. It's a warning to the Syrian regime to stop funneling weaponry to Hezbollah. So Hezbollah will try to regroup, to reorganize. And unfortunately, I cannot tell about the Lebanese army, because the Lebanese army received instructions to go South Lebanon and to start deploying there. And it effectively started deploying in the region of Marjayoun. But the government orders to the Lebanese army are not very clear. So I'm wondering if the Lebanese army encounters Hezbollah weaponry or try to seize it or to confiscate it, what may happen? So this is a real concern that I cannot predict for the time being. We better wait for the future days in order to have a better assessment of the situation.
Yeah, because I wanted to ask you, because it's quite confusing for people outside Lebanon to understand this, and it's really important. So we've got these 10,000 Lebanese army troops deployed to the south. If they see Hezbollah violating the terms of the truce, you're saying that the army doesn't really know how they're supposed to respond?
Yes. In principle, the army should seize all the weaponry and should kick out Hezbollah elements north to the Litani. But the attitude of the ministers of Hezbollah yesterday in the government, because, you know, our army follow the government. Our army is not a political independent institution. It is a tool in the hands of the Lebanese government that is vague regarding the implementation of the 1701. The prime minister and all the other ministers, they say they want to implement it. But the ministers of Hezbollah are taking a vague attitude toward this. So this is why I think that the Lebanese army should be very tough, should confiscate any weaponry south of the Litani in order to comply with the international resolution and to have the backing of the international community. So this is the main point. This is what should be done. But let's wait for the future days, for the next couple of days, to have the first tests about that.
Okay, so, I mean, it's not just the Lebanese army, is it? There's UNIFIL is there, and we've got the so-called tripartite mechanism, which is the US, France, and UNIFIL working together, plus the Lebanese army. They're all tasks with, they've got the same goal, which is to make the south of Lebanon safe, to make sure it doesn't pose a threat to neighboring Israel, to make sure there aren't any violations, and to make sure that Hezbollah doesn't drag Lebanon into another war. Together, do you think they can do it?
Well, UNIFIL is in Lebanon under Chapter 6 of the UN. It is not a combat mission of UNIFIL. It's an observation mission. And the US and French observers that would help are not yet on the ground, I suppose. And these are only observers. These constitute an umbrella for the Lebanese army, an international umbrella to act in order to restore the Lebanese sovereignty in South Lebanon. All these are positive elements and are subjects of hope. But I still put a question mark on what will Hezbollah do. If Hezbollah is really in this government, and if Hezbollah really accepted all the deal, they should comply and withdraw without the use of force and without contact or without clashes with the Lebanese army. It didn't happen yet. And the Lebanese army didn't deploy yet in all the south. They deployed only in the area of Marjayoun, where Hezbollah withdrew. And I remind that this is a Christian area in South Lebanon where Hezbollah is not welcome. So let's wait and see the next days, as I said.
All right. Well, thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. General Khalil Hellu, thank you.
Thank you.
We can speak now to career expert Dr. Jim Hoare. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. You were the first British representative to Pyongyang. You were also stationed in Seoul as a diplomat during the 1980s. And I want to start by asking you, we've had about 24 hours to take stock of these unexpected developments in South Korea. I mean, what's your take on what on earth is going on there?
I think Mr. Yoon rather lost the plot. He was always a rather marginal president in a sense that he only won by the slimmest of all majorities. I mean, less than 1%. The lowest of any South Korean president. And until recently, his party was in command of the National Assembly, but they lost that at the last National Assembly election. And instead, the opposition came in with a huge majority and have been both very critical of the president's wife for accepting expensive gifts and not declaring them, and also more recently for overturned the budget proposals and proposed a much reduced budget. This seems to have fazed Mr. Yoon, who took the action he did on the 3rd to declare martial law without, it would seem to me, much preparation. I mean, I would have thought that if you were going to do that, you would have had all your troops in position, ready to take over the Parliament building and strategic things like the media and so on. None of that seems to have been arranged. Some troops were sent to the National Assembly, but they quickly retreated when they met the opposition of the lawmakers and some of the crowd outside. So it seems to have been an ill-thought-out panic decision, which was rescinded as soon as it was opposed.
And, of course, the pretext that President Yoon gave for imposing martial law was the necessity to defend South Korea from pro-North Korean so-called anti-state forces. I mean, let's be clear, were there any specific threats, would you say?
No, I think that's dog whistle sort of tactic. That there are certain themes that the South Koreans always use, that there are opposition favours the North, and therefore it must be communist inspired, which I don't think there was any evidence for whatsoever, and that has disappeared from the public pronouncements. No, I think that was just a standard smear, if you like.
Okay, so as you say, logistically, few preparations were made. No credible or clear threat from the DPRK. So that still begs the question, what was the South Korean president trying to achieve, do you think?
I think he was trying to be able to do things as he wanted to do them, particularly to get his budget through, to stop the criticism of his wife. If you close down the National Assembly, then you could do both of those things. Or so he thought, but it clearly has completely misfired, and it looks as though there'd be a fair chance he will be out of office before very long, and possibly then facing criminal charges. It's ironic in a sense, because he was the chief prosecutor of Park Geun-hye, who was the president, but not one before last, who was ousted following an impeachment and imprisoned, later pardoned, but imprisoned. To say he was the prosecutor in that case.
Right, so a twist of irony as well. I mean, of course, you know both Koreas well. You've served in both the North and the South, which makes your knowledge particularly rare and valuable. Just how fragile, would you say, is the state of democracy looking to you in South Korea right now?
Well, I think it was a late developing flower. There's no doubt about that. It really only dates from the early 1990s, when there was a peaceable transfer from the last of the military rulers, President No Tae-woo, to a long-term civilian politician, Kim Yong-sam. And then it passed from him peacefully to Kim Dae-jung and so on. So I think it has become well established. And as a point I was hearing frequently last night in some commentaries, that those who've actually experienced martial law would now be people in their as adults, probably in their 60s and so on. It stopped in 1980 when Chun Doo-hwan came to power, and once he'd made himself president, then martial law was lifted. So there's been quite a long tradition now when no government has resorted to martial law because it didn't see the necessity of it. And I think, frankly, that's how the population will have reacted. A lot of the population will have reacted to this particular move. There was no need for it. There was no increased threat from the North or any other major problem. This was, I think, President Yoon either panicking or being frustrated at not being able to do what he wanted. And so he chose this blunderbuss approach, if you like.
Okay, so no martial law in South Korea in 44 years, since 1980, as you said. So before the time you were serving there as a diplomat. notable for us to mention as well that there are some 28,000 US troops based in South Korea. And we're hearing now that from the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, that Washington wasn't actually informed of this decision to impose martial law. Do you find that rather surprising?
I have. My impression is that Mr. Yoon made this decision on his own, rather suddenly, without really informing anybody. It was not very sensible not to inform the United States, but then if he had done, there's a fair chance that somebody would have leaked that news, that he was planning to do this. So I can understand that the American concern that here is a very close ally. As you say, there are American troops on the ground in South Korea. They are an important part of the defense of South Korea, and yet they were blindsided on this occasion.
Just lastly,
Mind you, I don't think in past declarations of martial law, I don't think the Americans were informed either. I think there's probably a track record there.
Okay,
you do these things.
Sure, and I just wanted to ask you lastly, I mean, we've had some pretty dramatic scenes in Parliament during the course of the last 24 hours in Seoul. There have been some large protests, we understand. I just want to ask for your sort of thoughts as to where you see things heading to from here, Dr. Ho.
Well, I would be very surprised if Parliament doesn't go ahead with an impeachment process. I mean, I think it's not just the opposition party which has a majority in the House, but also the smaller parties in the House. And some of Yoon's own party have been saying he shouldn't have done this. He should be impeached. So I think that we will see a move in Parliament in the next few days to impeach the president. Now everybody is on alert to make sure that if there is another attempt at anything like a military intervention, that the protests will be very strong and very, very marked. And if the impeachment goes ahead, then it goes to the courts. And I think Yoon might find himself a convicted criminal. But that's speculation on my part. But I think there's going to be a period of uncertainty, but it looks as though the opposition is going to be in control. Yoon's own secretariat, the staff of the Blue House, have all offered their resignation, and his government doesn't seem to be his government doesn't seem to want to support him either. So I think his days are numbered.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us, career expert Dr. Jim Ho. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, for more analysis on the situation, we can speak now to Yo Han-koo, a former trade minister for South Korea under President Moon Jae-in. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. You've been quoted in the media as saying that President Yoon has made a grave mistake. Why do you say that?
This is 21st century Korea, and it was about 40 years ago that the previous the Korean president used this martial law, but now Korea is fully democratized, and it was really kind of stunned many Korean people last night. So I think it could really weaken his political base because of this martial kind of law, the action last night.
Okay, and we understand there were no specific threats with regards to North Korea, which President Yoon actually had cited. So what do you think he was trying to achieve?
His approval rating has been hovering around, 17, 18, 19% for the last, the last few weeks. And then, he has been sort of kind of going through a tough time because of some of the kind of scandal related to the First Lady. And also, right now, the Korean National Assembly is really dominated by the opposition party. So many of these key policy initiatives were really blocked by this opposition party. And I guess that might have really frustrated him as well. So I don't know. I mean, nobody really know what the President Yoon was trying to achieve with this very radical and surprise martial law action. But obviously, that really, was a kind of grave misjudgment or kind of a mistake he made.
Do you think he's likely to survive, or would you say that impeachment was the likely next step forward for President Yoon Suk-yeol?
I think it remains to be seen. Unfortunately, Korea had the similar experience about 7-8 years ago when the former President Park was impeached. Right now, we feel like this unfortunate deja vu is coming back. And right now, in order to impeach the president, we have to go through a few steps. First, the vote by National Assembly has to be, passed. Right now, this, in order to impeach, it needs two-third majority. And right now, this opposition party is only 8 seats short of this two-third majority. So it depends on this 8, going to vote from the ruling party, whether some of these ruling party lawmakers could defect to this, kind of impeachment camp. So, but now, I mean, the last night, it was really surreal and stunning movement. And many Korean people were really, how can I say, outraged and frustrated by this sudden move by President Yoon. So obviously, right now, for the next few weeks, this impeachment will be really at the front and center of the Korean politics. And we have to, see how this turned out to be.
When you got the news, I'm just wondering what went through your mind?
I just thought it was fake news. I mean, last night when I got this text from my friend, my first reaction was that it shouldn't be real. I mean, it must be fake news or some joke or something. So that really shows that, I mean, it's a 21st century, and Korea is one of the most, highly advanced and also most democratized, countries in the world. And I mean, nobody might have expected that we could see such a scene that we saw, like, movies from this 40 years ago could replay again in reality.
Now, I've heard you in other interviews linking the situation in South Korea and the sense of frustration that you just described there to the advent or the return of Donald Trump to the White House in Washington. What's the connection?
I think it's a, weird coincidence, but actually in 2017, when Donald Trump was inaugurated, just only a few months later, the Korean president at that time, Park, was impeached. Right now, this Donald Trump 2.0 will be inaugurated in January 20th. And then now Korea is entering into a new, this impeachment kind of, debate and this political turmoil. So unfortunately, it's a kind of weird coincidence or, deja vu, coming back.
Yeah, and people in Washington must be pretty worried looking at South Korea these last 24 hours, a key ally. 28,500 US troops are stationed in your country. We understand that Washington wasn't even informed that martial law was about to be declared. Do you think that there is any sort of lasting diplomatic fallout from all of this?
I wouldn't, amplify the fallout from this last night's saga. I think, the good news is that this, martial law was kind of lifted only after about 6 hours later. And it shows that the Korean, the democracies is alive and resilient. And right now, the Korean politics is kind of shifting towards this impeachment, debate. So again, this is also, based on this, National Assembly and this democratic process. So yes, obviously, Washington might have been surprised, and also more kind of information sharing and more discussion need to be carried out on both sides. But I think, we have to be a bit more patient.
Yeah, I mean, let's go back to the pretext for the martial law being imposed, which was this threat cited by President Yoon from North Korea. Turns out there was no specific threat, or not that we know of. But I'm just wondering what this says about relations between the two countries and the fact that some fears over North Korea can cause political paralysis across the border in your country. Do you think North Korea might try to exploit this?
I mean, considering this security, environment that South Korea face in regard to North Korea, I mean, we always have to be vigilant about the possibility of North Korean provocation or manipulation in this kind of vulnerable, situation. During this administration, this Korean government has been really kind of hawkish, maintaining hawkish stance when it comes to North Korea. And also North Korea also kind of shifted their policy, stance towards South Korea as they are sort of giving up on reunification and seeing South Korea as a main kind of enemy, and so on and so forth. So this tension has been quite escalating, and as we know, recently North Korea sent their troops to Ukraine, and probably there might have been very dangerous kind of transaction in terms of sensitive technology transfer from Russia to North Korea. So when we look at all these security circumstances, we cannot underestimate the possible provocation by North Korea in this kind of situation.
One of your colleagues in South Korea, Kim Min-seok, who is a senior Democratic Party official, described what's happened in the last 24 hours as follows. He said, "We have an abnormal president with an abnormal presidential wife who tried to protect abnormal power." What do you have to say to that?
I think really it's unfortunate that, that we find ourselves in this kind of, situation. And, there is obviously, political differences between different parties, and there might be some, confrontation, etc. But I think it's always important to bring together these different parties and kind of embrace different opinions and kind of, find solution through compromise and, discussion. But looks like this kind of process was kind of a missing, for the last, few months or, years in this administration. So I think we need to, bring back this, normality into this political environment again.
Yeah, OK, so 6 hours of martial law have now come to an end. We've had some dramatic scenes in Parliament. There's been some major protests, some unions calling for a general strike. I mean, how do you see the next few days unfolding for South Korea?
Right now, this opposition party is really kind of moving into this the impeachment mode in the National Assembly. And then, as I said, whether this National Assembly could achieve this 2/3 majority to get it approved in the National Assembly, that would be really critical scene, which will determine the fate of this president and also the fate of this Korean politics for coming month. So, but I would say that because of the last night's surprise, this saga related to this martial, the martial law, the invocation, I think this, this Korean public were very, how can I say, disappointed, and then sort of lost confidence in the current, government. So we have to see how this Korean public and the National Assembly, kind of find a solution and, try to, normalize the situation in coming weeks and months.
Okay, well, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for your time. We really appreciate it. Yohan Koo, former Trade Minister for South Korea. Thank you very much indeed. Well, let's find out more now about the significance of these developments in South Korea, the reality behind the perceived threat level from Pyongyang, and find out more about the reality of life in North Korea, where we can speak to Timothy Cho, a North Korean human rights activist and two-time defector who joins us from London. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. South Korea's President Yoon imposed this martial law last night, saying he's defending the country from North Korean anti-state forces. I'm just wondering, what did you think when you heard that news?
Well, firstly, thank you for having me. Well, I was quite shocked, as my role, particularly human rights activist, and I'm also secretariat for the UK All-Party Parliamentary Group of North Korea, and continue monitor on this situation, and both inside and outside of North Korea. But something was happening in South Korea yesterday, and I first thought it was a fake news, but which I confirmed with the governmental report of Korea, it was happening. And but following the President Yoon's statement, and this was not what he actually said, I'm citing that direct threat from North Korea and the nuclear threat from North Korea, but it was more likely he was referring the within internal political opposition, but he also then adding that part of anti-North Korean forces. So it's quite been, of course, the political situation in South Korea is very divided at the moment, and extremely divided between pro-North Korean side, or we may also mentioning a far left group in South Korea, and in terms of the political situation in the country. And he probably felt there was quite extreme movement of it, and especially within the parliament, and even though he's the president, I think his role might be quite limited to do so in many ways, including the budget plan for next year. I'm not exactly sure, however, was it really necessary that he had to declare martial law, which is very unprecedented, and even call the special force entering the parliament and blocking with order to arrest or even could kill someone under that constitution. So, and I have to say, frankly, it was quite shocking to see, particularly South Korea today, we regard such a democracy, and I was very alarming and carefully following the development and the situation in South Korea. Of course, it was after 6 hours, and the martial law lifted, which relieved me. However, the political situation remains quite uncertain in this country, and I continue watch the situation and which way it may develop in the coming weeks, especially opposition parties and the groups and all across the country as well, as you follow the news right now. Okay. And they call impeachment or ask the president to step down from what it's been happening over the past few hours.
Yeah, and of course, Timothy, you grew up in North Korea, and I'm just wondering how you think all of these developments in South Korea are viewed by the North.
Well, if you ask me as a North Korean escapee, an activist, and grew up my life within the totalitarian system, it's something not possible in North Korea, this kind of martial law or movement or even the president's use of the force and try to calm the political situation. By all means, nothing is possible in North Korea. Even any protest or military coup happens in North Korea, the government come out with the all available weaponry, including tanks or even air flight, and they could just wipe away all these protesters involved. And of course, there is no media search follows, and the international attention come to scrutinize, and media are going to ask experts and politicians around the world about the situation on such country, like what happens last night in South Korea. I think it is happening because South Korea is a democratic country, and it is quite sad. The results were the president had to use the last resort of military and martial law. If it was no alternative choice for him to make such a decision, and I would personally, of course, have a number of questions for him. Would he really have had to use this kind of the final options? However, still comparing, as I was even talking or following the conversation with my North Korean colleagues and activist colleagues, and we still talked about this, where this such development or movement or what happened, or even people gathered at the parliament, over 4,000 people within a couple of hours gathered in South Korea. That is such not happens in North Korea. I wonder, however, what was North Korean regime's viewpoint? Particularly, they were watching on this, what was happening in South Korea. And certainly, if there were any kind of movement was motivated, encouraged from North Korea's related groups in South Korea, what we call far left, maybe quite far left group, or North Korean supportive groups. And I think that's such a muse for North Korea, particularly with current situation where North Korea has been stepping into even international the security threat and joining Putin's illegal war, the reputation and has been gaining by themselves. And also they even declared the first time and admitted at the United Nations that they have prison camps and even executing political prisoners by all means, and people who have been expressing against the regime or those repatriated North Korean refugees during their escape, and who also had contact with missionaries or attended churches, and such as all these, North Korea regard them as spy, and that spy, the punishment comes what they so-called political prisoners. So I felt it was quite a dangerous moment as well, providing this platform and atmosphere to the North Korean regime and make this uncertainty and atmosphere and within South Korean politics and society all across. I mean, of course, South Korea is not alone, as you can imagine. And I am based in the United Kingdom, and we were carefully watching the situation in South Korea last night. And also, we do know that there are over 28,000 U.S. and NATO troops are currently stationed in South Korea defend North Korea's nuclear threat.
Okay.
So we, as North Koreans and escapees especially, we still think because that was democracy and democratic order of this country, and such things were possible within few hours. Martial law declared or lifted the martial law after 6 hours. But I have to concern that what's going to come over the next few weeks, and how this might provide opportunity for the North Korean regime as well.
Yeah, I just want to ask you a little bit more about how North Koreans feel towards the South Koreans, and I'm talking here at the sort of the level of the normal person on the streets. You've described in a British newspaper being taught to hate South Koreans when you were in North Korea. Just tell us how you learned that. So
South Korea is the enemy to all the education level in North Korea. And along, of course, they always regard South Koreans as the enemy along with the Western side. I mean, if you see two types of brainwashing educations in North Korea, which implementation starts from age 12 months. But the first brainwashing education in North Korea is you are brainwashing them to believe and think and actually the Kim family as your God and great leaders. That brainwashing education starts from age 12 months when they start work by bowing to Kim family picture frames in every household in North Korea. But the second brainwashing education is very interesting. It is about anti-religious education. Why? They are brainwashing you that such as religion, and particularly and Christianity, it is American religion, and they try to use that religion to destroy to North Korean communist society. So this anti, by all means, that world and spectrum of the whole atmosphere towards the U.S. and whole Westerns. And then they call South Korea a puppet of the Western imperialists. Which I grew up in North Korea, and many of my friends and generations, we believed, and in that one way or another. And I also believed the first Kim, Kim Il-sung. I thought he was God. And when he died, I genuinely cried overnight and not eating well, in which I was even asking for my father, who was a history teacher in high school.
And what do you think of him now, Timothy? What do you think of him now when you think back about Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il and the rest of the Kim dynasty? What are your thoughts about them today?
Well, they're nothing more than just a man, and whose ambition and created the country as a large prison society, and close people's eyes and block ears, and brainwashing from very young age, and media the media blockade from both outside and inside. It is a tragic, the country, how it has created a huge prison, I could call a prison country in the world. And there are 25 million people locked in this cage, and they cannot see, they cannot watch, they cannot listen, but they have to forcibly act and speak and think as the Kim, which is very sad. It is one of the reasons I have become a human rights activist myself, to speak and raise awareness of the situation. And I'm sure the regime, what's been maintaining, holding such as the darkest we so-called the Hermit Kingdom, it won't go that far. Of course, it has been there over the past 70 years, but generations growing, and they desire and they want to see the truth. They can block it and completely, as the state has and the regime has failed to destroy the hope and future and all of this, what generations desire continue move forward in this way between inside and outside.
Timothy, sorry to interrupt you. I mean, just lastly, I don't know if you have any contact with anyone in North Korea at the moment. Just tell us what you know with regards to the situation there right now.
Well, we do hear from inside family members. It can be both directly and indirectly. However, as you know and the world knows, there are no such mobile phones, internet, social media, or Zoom call like you can invite me all the way from London available. But the situation is bad inside North Korea, and it's been around 17 years I escaped from this country, but the situation has been getting worse and worse. However, what it means, I'm complete closure of the borders and barely escape anyone from inside the country. What I did years ago, maybe that could be the last stage of the process, and especially with the international uncertainty movement, what is come to expect, and yet. And people from outside haven't stopped, continue stand and fight against the regime.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. We really appreciate it. Timothy Cho, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that's it for this special edition of Global News Today. Thanks for watching, and wherever you are in the world, if you're celebrating Christmas, we wish you all the very best.
From the White House to Gaza, Kyiv to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deep fake and artificial intelligence,
they've got to have a vote and a say.
It's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,